Yo, what's going on, you guys? It's your boy 3STACK in this thing, baby, representing TKOG. And today I'm going to be showcasing you guys for the very first time on this channel a tier list. I'm going to be including meta and rogue archetypes. There's a lot more non-meta included. I'm going to be going over 60 archetypes. So just a warning. I mean, this is like my fifth take, I think. But the videos always came out to be at least 2 hours long. So this is going to be a pretty long video for the simple fact that I chose to cover so many archetypes. I will say, before we get started, I'm going to do my traditional intro, which is including information that sometimes people overlook in the description of my videos. But make sure that you like the video. Leave a like if you liked it. Make sure you leave a dislike if you didn't. Make sure that if you do subscribe, that you click the notification bell so you don't miss out on anything that I do. And also, considering that so many people have been joining, I've been noticing a lot more growth for Patreon. And if you guys are interested in being mentored or taught by me, I definitely recommend joining the Patreon because it is a service that I offer to my tier 2 and higher members. I personally learned from other players. That's how I got better. So just understand that sometimes to grow, you've got to learn from other people. Not to say that I would be the one that has to teach you, but you've got to reach out to somebody. Somebody with experience, someone that knows what they're doing. I mean, they don't have to have premium tops, but it's better to just know that their word can be backed up. You know what I mean? But those are just things for you to consider. Also consider joining my Discord, which is absolutely free, and subscribing is free. And those things help me grow. And I really appreciate it. So, yeah. And I also really wanted to get a level of diversity concerning my content. I know that duels and deck profiles aren't going to get me as far as I want to go. And I feel like I'm selling myself short by not expanding on what I can do, because I'm definitely capable of doing it. I believe in myself, and I know that this kind of thing is not like it's so hard, and that's the reason why I haven't done it. To be honest, it just really hasn't crossed my mind, and I'm kind of mad at myself for not doing it before, but it's never too late. So what I'm going to do here, because of the video format, like the way it's set up, it's not like your normal tier list because I'm using Dueling Book, is I'm going to use archetypes as placeholders for the tier that they're in, so that when you see where the tier is, you can always reference where that archetype is. So, for example, if Goki was tier 1, I'd have it at the top. The higher up on the list that it is, the closer it is to tier 1. So the closer to the left it is means the higher it is on this list. So that means if Goki's here, this means because it's on the top, it's tier 1. And because it's the farthest to the left, it's the best tier 1 deck. Everything to the right is not going to be higher on the tier list. They're still going to be in the same tier list until you see the next placeholder. For example, if Cyber Dragon was the place marker for tier 1.5, then everything to the left of Cyber Dragon is in tier 1. Everything to the right of Goki is in tier 1 before it gets to the tier 1.5 placemaker, but it's also not better than Goki, if that makes sense. I'm going to talk about engines, splashables, other archetypes. I'm going to do my best to give a brief summary so that the video won't be as long, but there's a lot to cover. And I just really don't want to kind of skip over a lot of important details, because at the end of the day, tier lists are really big with information. I feel like that's the biggest deal with tier lists. So there's not a lot that you could skip over or skim. You just kind of have to sit through these. Personally, when I watch tier lists, I normally just watch the whole thing, because I don't just watch to see what other people think a deck should be in. I want to hear why they say so, because normally I already have a strong opinion on what is in what tier and what deck is good and what deck's not. So I don't need to watch a tier list to figure out what's good. I just want to know how other people think, because for me, it's entertaining. When someone sees potential in something that other people don't, I always like to hear their thoughts, because sometimes people make a lot of sense, and it makes you wonder why other people haven't considered that as well. So now that we've explained how the video is going to be organized, I'm going to say this before we get into the tier list. I will say, so there's not really bad decks, there's just bad players, which is something one of my best friends always says, and it really does resonate well with me. And just because it's not tier 1 does not mean that it's going to win every duel. Tier 3 decks will still be tier 2 and tier 1 decks. There's no deck that's definitively unbeatable. There's always a counterplay, and it's how you build your deck that counts, secondly only to how you play it. But what matters the most is the person that's behind the deck. Even if it's built right, you really have to have a good pilot to fly that ship, if that makes sense. So Tier 3 decks can still win. The difference between the Tier 3 deck and a Tier 1 deck, a lot of the times, is more like the tools that the decks have at their disposal. The Tier 1 decks normally have a better tools at their disposal, and they're just set up to thrive and excel in the format or environment that they're in. And sometimes they just have really good matchups against the other decks that really are viable. So a Tier 3 deck also could have been Tier 1 last format because it was seemingly an anti-meta counter to really good strategies. Well, some Tier 1 decks are also not only Tier 1 because of everything they can do, but also because they have such good matchups against other decks that are considered meta, which is the most efficient tactic available. And because that's what meta is, it means that we as the players define what meta is. So when someone says something's meta, you can't just shrug it off because you have to really think about it. The reason why decks are considered meta is because we consider it meta. No one else decides it but the player base. What that also means is that everyone's opinion matters. Because if people's opinions didn't matter, then no one would ever come to the conclusion of what is meta and what's not meta. Because at the end of the day, you can consider it consensus or not, but it's a mutually agreed thing amongst multiple players. A large amount of people have to decide if a deck really is deserving of a spot. So if someone says a deck's meta, even if you shrug it off and laugh at them and say this deck's not meta, you have to take into account that they might not be the only person that feels that way. And that makes a big deal because, again, like I said, we as the player base do actually decide what the meta is. We have 100% control over that. Konami does not decide what's meta. They just decide what decks we get to choose from, but we still make the choice at the end of the day. And I hope that makes sense to you guys. So let's get started. So the first thing that I'm going to do, and since it's going to be a long video, this time I have a drink next to me in case my throat gets raspy. The first thing I'm going to do is just talk about an archetype. So when I start an archetype, I'm going to put it in a placeholder, and that's going to be the first deck to represent that tier, if that makes sense. And I'm going to do the best that I can to be really fast with this while still providing the information that I have pertaining to the archetype. Sometimes it'll be extensive, sometimes it might not be, but my coverage is going to be good because in general, I can normally provide a really good synopsis on most of these decks. I would say like 97% because I've played almost all of them. And the ones that I haven't played, other people have played that I know of. And I can use just from what I've seen, purely, it can be more objective because it is purely speculation. But speculation is not a bad thing because if I see a deck absolutely destroying other decks consistently and topping events, and I see how it plays and how, it basically operates against meta decks, it can give me a really strong opinion on how I feel that deck would be, how good it would be and where it would be on the tier list. So keep that in mind because some of these decks are not going to be as popular, but you're going to see them very high on the tier list. And don't forget that representation does not determine how good a deck is. Popularity is not the determining factor. For me, results matter more at the end of the day. And also the playstyle, when it's comparative to other matchups, is a big deal because some decks, like I said, naturally are better against certain decks. So sorry for all that rambling if you consider that rambling, but that's really important to get out the way before we get into this tier list. So the first deck that we're going to discuss is Heroes. Heroes is going to be our first tier 3 deck. So for now, I'm going to put Heroes here. And this is going to be the placeholder for tier 3. Not to say that this is a bad deck, because like I said, there really aren't any bad decks. I have destroyed people with battery mans. Trust me when I say it is a very true statement. There really isn't bad decks, there's just bad players. And honestly, a lot of bad players give good decks a bad reputation. And this is just the truth. And it's a tough pill to swallow, but guess what? You have to face it. Heroes is a very good deck, though. I wouldn't take anything away from it. Does it have the best matchups against the meta? I feel like it doesn't have a good Drytron matchup unless it goes first and opens Dark Law. If it opens Dark Law and possibly Plasma, I feel like the deck's lit against Virtual Worlds, Drytrons, Shaddolls, unless they open Super Poly, against Lyreless Tri-Brigade. I mean, pretty much everything that's not Flunderies, I would say. And that's not... Because, I mean, Trap Eldritch Needs are great, but they can dismantle the Dark Law without even utilizing their engine. They can just use trap cards. So I feel like just because of how powerful Dark Law is, this deck is always going to be a threat. And then because of how powerful Plasma is, this deck can be very terrifying as well. And Phoenix Enforcer is a big deal, but I feel like it's not as big of a deal for its own deck as it is for other decks. And I know that's really sad because it's intended for this archetype, but it really didn't do the deck the solid that it did for other decks. Because this deck already had interactions that Enforcer provided. Like, Enforcer is a higher quality version of what the deck already had. It's like an upgraded version of something that the deck already had, but the deck didn't really need it. Where the deck is lacking, as I feel, the variety and yeah, I just feel like it's more so the diversity and the interruptions it can put up. I think it plays through a bit more than your average deck, and it doesn't just lose out to a single hand trap. It can be very aggressive. It can kill you out of nowhere. Some people just opt to blind second because it can be just that hyper aggressive, but I just feel that it lacks, being that its engine is so huge. Some of these decks is going to be in tier 3 because they can do really good things and they can honestly compare very well, like comparatively to tier 2 and tier 1 decks. They can hang with them, but because their engine's so big, there's not a lot of space for defensive cards, and unfortunately every board can't be broken with pure engine alone if you're playing certain archetypes. Some archetypes can just do it better, but Hero's definitely not one of them. So I'm just going to keep it here in tier 3. I don't want to talk too much about a single archetype because that's how the video ends up getting too long. Adamantimators. This is a solid tier 1.5 deck. I'm going to put it here as the place marker for tier 1.5. I think Adamant is one of the coolest combo decks that have ever been printed, and I really do think that deck can be very explosive, very fun, and in the right hands, it is a terrifying combo deck. It can set up the Buster Lock, multiple interruptions, it plays through hand traps extremely well. The normal summon can be a bit of a problem, but honestly, the way the deck's built is what matters more at the end of the day, because when you know your deck has a weakness, you should always build your deck to supplement for that weakness. I say that a lot in my deck profiles, and that's a bit of advice that always tends to fly over people's heads, but if you're trying to learn and you're trying to get better, sometimes you might want to consider that somebody's opinion could be valuable. And I feel like that in its essence, that opinion that I share and I'm so strong about it, and that's why I reiterate it so much, is a big deal, because every deck has its own weaknesses. And if you are not building your deck tailored to at least, I mean, you don't literally have to just build your deck to beat the card that it loses to single-handedly, but if you're not putting out at least a little bit of compromise in the term of your engine and just being a bit more flexible, you know, you might want to play cards, you might have to play cards you don't want to play, but you know that you need to, and that's where, like, you're going to have to do something like that with Adamants. But I do like how it can be built. There's so many ways to play it. You've got pranks, you've got a hand trap build with shifter. You can absolutely play. I like a build where I play the Tree Amid's trap card. I think it's just a good card to recover resources and have a disruption, even against Dark Ruler. But that's my build. You know, that's my spice. People don't play that card. But definitely consider the Tree Amid trap card. It gives this deck a whole nother dimension into what it can do. It's just really, really good. If you guys don't know about Tree Amid Pulse, I put you on it. And just know, moving forward, test it in your Adamantimator list because it's really good. But, I mean, this deck is... It's not... I'm not going to say it's just another combo deck because it's not like other combo decks. It's really unique. And there's quite a few combo decks that are like that. But I feel Adarok is just not as consistent. And then on top of it not being as consistent, being that it doesn't have enough starters like other decks do, it's also the fact that there's a huge RNG factor with the deck. And that's not going to take away from it. And that's not the reason why it's not tier 1. It's not tier 1 because it hasn't been tier 1 for a long time. You know, a lot of the cards that made it broken, per se, are gone. And the deck's really in a better place as far as balance goes because it was a bit too overtuned in its initial inception. But I feel now it's still in a really strong place. I mean, the inboard's so good that most decks have to open Dark Ruler and still have to deal with the Buster Lock they can put up. And it's really good going second. Like, it feels nice when you normal summon Guardian and Special Analyzer with like a Researcher or a another extender in your hand. It just feels really good. The deck can play through a lot. It really shines and excels in building a board and sometimes breaking a board, but more often not building a board. It doesn't really excel in recovery or follow-up. It doesn't really have a strong resource management system built into its archetype, and it's not going to do very well against Plunder. It's not going to, obviously, you know, you've got bad matchups. It's still going to hard lose to a lot of meta decks. But for decks that are just setting up normal boards, like, for example, a Dragon Link board, out of all the meta decks, Adarok can break the Dragon Link board more consistently than it can break the Drytron, the Plunder, the Phantom Knight board. I mean, it's really hard to out the Phantom Knight board. It's just really, really hard. the virtual world board. You know, it's pretty much its best chance is to break the Dragon Link board, and that was done even in the past. Dragon Link and Adderrock were kind of just rivals in that regard. It was a really cool format. There's quite a few decks that were just contending for the top spot. But Adderrock's in a good place. It's tier 1.5 without a doubt. I wouldn't put it lower, but there's an argument that could justify being put higher. Next up, I'm going to talk about Plunder Patrols. This is a high tier 2. This is a very solid tier 2. This is a place marker for tier 2. I think this deck is very, very good. I'm not going to go as far to say that it's broken or insane, because that's another thing that I should have mentioned. A lot of people think a lot of decks are broken. And the thing is, just because a deck can do things that you would consider to be broken doesn't mean the deck itself is broken, because there's a lot of decks that can do unfair things. But what really matters the most is how the deck's able to achieve that. How is it able to do that consistently and through interruptions? Because you never play solitaire in this game. Your opponent normally always has something, whether it's a hand trap, a back row, or an actual effect negation. The deck can't just be broken just because it does broken things. It's gotta be considered, you know, everything that it can play through has to be a factor. So just because my deck can FTK you and hand loop you and set up 8 negates doesn't mean it's broken, because if it can't play through at least 2 hand traps and it's not able to break a board sometimes with engine and play extremely well under pressure, and if it's not consistent, you know, and it's prone to breaking very often, then all those things factor, and at the end of the day, it won't be considered broken because of all of those things, even though it does broken stuff, if that makes sense. But Plunder's in a really good spot. I play this deck myself. I play a lot of these decks, and I have a strong opinion on the format right now. I really don't like the fact that Flunders and Virtual Worlds and Bird Up all have to be meta. I feel like, dang, can we just have one of them and the other ones be rogue? But you can be in a rough spot playing this deck because it is a very good meta call certain formats. But then there's other formats where Plunders just can't really shine the way that they want to. But despite all the turbulence that they have to face, and despite their sheer mechanic being one of the biggest downfalls and them having to deal with the niche of their own archetype, you know, the deck can lose to itself sometimes, but it's despite all of those odds, the deck's really consistent. It's very explosive. It breaks boards with pure engine. It plays through hand traps. It navigates extremely well through fully established boards. It's got a good shit-all matchup. It's good against Phantom Knights. It's incredibly good against Drytrons if you go first, and it just cracks right through Ellich's skull. I think it's really, really strong. When it gets its support, when we finally get a Wind and Earth, mark my words, this deck is going to be way up here. Because Plunder Patrol is a very strong deck. Whether you're playing a going second build or a hand trap build, the deck's engine just gives you so much value for each card. It normally just, it's like playing a different form of Burning Abyss or Shadalls, how your cards just naturally replace themselves and float, and you gain so much advantage. And from an economic standpoint, you can pretty much stabilize a board, neutralize any threat your opponent would have on their follow-ups, being that you can banish cards, and banishing normally just takes the card out of the game for the most part, meaning that it can't be recovered or recurred anymore. That its playstyle can even be reminiscent of Strikers at time because of how it's able to deal so well with established boards going second, but still yet going first. It puts up just enough to be able to carry over to the next turn, and its diversity in how it can interact with the opponent, I think, is really, really good. It's something to be considered that Morg, Lise, and Braun all offer a level of diversity depending on the matchup. There's different ships that can help you to get out of different situations, and navigating boards, especially just having access to cards like Blackbeard and Emblem going second, is just really, really good. There's a few bad matchups, but I just mentioned them. All the good matchups are actually a lot of other really good meta decks. Breaking through the Phantom Knight board, the original one with Dragoon before they started playing Enforcer with the artifacts, and Dragon Links, and the original Virtual World board that had VFDs, it was actually a lot better then, but it's still a really strong deck. This deck is definitely something to consider. It's one of the most popular rogue decks / tier 2 decks. Some people call it rogue. I consider it tier 2. I think a lot of people see this as a tier 2 deck. I'm talking a lot about this because this is a deck that's on the rise, and no matter how many tier 2 decks go in this slot, you guys are going to see Plunder's going to stay pretty up there because they're a really good deck. And they don't really have the inherent weaknesses of other decks. Its biggest weakness is just its niche, but that's because Konami has not released the rest of the support that it needs desperately for it to thrive in any environment. So then when it gets the Wind and Earth support, this deck's going to be a good meta call no matter what format we're in. And that's what makes it so good, because it can be considered like, it's like when you go back to playing Madolches or something like that. It's just like strikers, It's adaptable enough. It's not as flexible as strikers, but it does have a sort of toolbox to its own archetype, and it's adaptable enough to where it's certain formats you just want to play plunders because Moark is just so good against a lot of decks. It shines really well in the Eldritch and the Shaddoll and the Phantom Knight matchup, and Brawn is just extremely good against trap decks. So yeah. And that's excluding the fact that it has access to the generic rank 4s and synchros at its disposal. Next up, let's talk about Eldritch. Eldritch is tier 1.5. And I'm going to put it over Adderok because Eldritch is able to stabilize boards, I think, even better than Adderok sometimes because it just does it in a different way. It also plays way scarier cards. It's so ironic that you can look at a trap deck's in-board and then you look at a fully established combo board and you say, you know what, I'll play against Adderok. Because nobody's going to really want to fight through Skill Drain, Imperial Order, Anti-Spell, Goes In, Rivalry, Punishment, Prison, all these crazy high-impact traps, Needle Seal and Torrential Strike, and a good engine and Spectre Border. Those cards are actually significantly scarier than a combo board. Because a lot of the times, the cards you use to break a combo board just don't work against Eldritch. It's kind of in a league of its own. It's not the king of trap decks, I would say, but a lot of people consider it to be that. It's in a really good spot. It's been performing extremely well. Economically, it just maintains the advantage that it starts with. It doesn't really circulate or snowball per se like Altergeist can. But it's debatable on which one is better. But this is one of the best trap decks right now, and for a very good reason. It has a lot of good matchups. And unironically, its bad matchup is just more so just to back row removal. But between Heavenly Prison and the Psalms you can play and the chainable traps, this deck's in a really good spot. It's a lot better than a lot of decks on this list. And the sheer simplicity and ease of play makes it more popular, just like Tri-Brigade. Speaking of Geist, I have Geist on this list. I need to find them and throw them. Because Geist are actually up there, you guys. To my Geist fans, because I am a Geist player myself, you guys should be really happy because Geist are in a really good spot. And they honestly always find a way to sneak in there, like pretty much every format. But Geist didn't just sneak in there this time. They came and they just took a spot for themselves. Like, no one had to really pull a chair out for Geist. They kind of just punched a hole through the wall and just sat in it. Like, we're going to be here whether you like it or not. Like, Geist just kind of just took their own seat. And I really like that. It's like the chick that wasn't invited to the party but came anyways, and she actually turned the whole thing up. Altergeist are absolutely cutting up right now. I personally feel Altergeist is stronger. So because the tier list can also be based on my opinion, I'm going to put Altergeist over Eldritch because personally, the difference between these decks is that Eldritch can play more traps because Geist Engine requires more monsters. But the difference is like Eldritch can play Inspector Border and like Floodgates, like Goes In match. Geist can still play Rivalry. They might not be able to play Border, but where Geist shine is that their engine excels at just breaking through boards, setting up interruptions through turbulence. They're much more consistent. They can play Secret Village of the Spellcasters, which is a much bigger deal. And they have access to cards like Meliseek and Silquidis and Conqueri. And Multi-Faker is arguably better than any Eldritch trap card that you could ever use. So the Altergeist engine has more value as well. These decks can do virtually the same things. A lot of trap decks can honestly do a lot of the same things. It's pretty much the best traps in the game that you can play slapped on top. You just slap on top like the engine that you choose. The Altergeist engine is stronger than the Eldritch engine. The Altergeist can set up disruptions that protect them from blowout cards that the Eldritch just can't really do anything about. The sheer aggression and the kill pressure that Altergeist have definitely exceeds that of what Eldritch can put out. Eldritch can close the game out much slower than Altergeist, but at the same time, you can play more trap cards in this deck. But it's all based on how you feel, because I feel that Protocol, Manifestation, and Spoofing are better than Sanguine and Conquistador and Walkero. And that's excluding the fact that you have Seek and Silquidis and Hextia and cards like Banshee and Faker and Marionetter. So Altergeist just have a better engine. The differences are very small. I feel like if you want to play more trap cards and you just literally do not want to think, the brain dead monkey deck is Eldritch. The deck that's going to require a bit more technical play, understanding, and planning ahead is going to be Altergeist. So Altergeist is tier 1.5 without a doubt. It's a very solid tier 1.5. It's in a very good spot. It's been overperforming considering what people thought of it in the past. I feel like it's been overperforming. it doesn't really have a lot of bad matchups. You could say Drytron's the worst matchup, but Drytron's arguably everybody's worst matchup. You do pretty well against Flunder, because you can play the defensive trap cards. Flunder is gonna struggle a lot against trap decks. Sword Soul's gonna struggle a lot against trap decks. There's certain meta decks that can play better against monster disruptions than they can grinding through high impact trap cards. It's really hard. And I don't have enough time to mention every single matchup for all 60 of these archetypes, because that means I'm talking about matchups 60 times on top of talking about the deck and where it stands. But I'm going to mention it to the more popular decks because these are the ones you're going to see more, so you should know what their matchups are, And I can't mention every matchup. And I will say, Geist objectively has a better Striker matchup than Eldritch. Eldritch is actually going to struggle a lot with Striker. A lot. Almost every single time, Striker always has the upper hand. But whereas Geist definitely can tank and actually trade extremely well with Sky Strikers. And there's often times where Geists are just on the upper hand and it turns at advantage. And that's really a big statement because Strikers, more often than not, are able to just dominate and excel in those areas where if you're trading resources, this deck is going to trade with everybody and normally be on the plussing end. After the end of everything that you've done, every interaction, the 1-for-1s, the 1-for-2s, Strikers normally out-resource you, but Geist can still keep up. So tier 1.5 place marker right now is Geist. Tier 2 place marker right now is Plunder Patrols. True Draco is actually funny enough right here, and I'm just going to talk about it because it's really close. I'm going to put it over Plunder. I can't be biased. I love Plunder so much, and it's such a great deck. But True Draco truly is the king of rogue decks, and if it was in tier 3, it would be the highest tier 3 deck. It's just such an insane archetype with an incredible simplicity that just gets the job done. The thing is, it's really not about how flashy the deck is or how many different things it can do. It does a lot of the same things. The repetition is the embodiment of also consistency because you're normally always going to see your engine with this deck. It's so compact that, in this deck, not only is it compact, but it's really hard to hand trap, but it's a huge strength because anything you can hand trap with this deck is a body that's going to stay on the field to the next turn. So that means if you Ash, for example, Ignis, he's still going to activate on your turn. You Ash him on your turn, he's still going to activate on my turn. You Ash Diagram, it's still going to be there. A lot of these hand traps like Effect Veiler, Ash, Bell, Infinite Impermanence, they're not going to trade very well with Draco because even though it can prevent a play for that current moment, Draco's very good at stalling and playing defensively. They have a lot of floodgates. They almost have they have the actual toolbox for floodgates. They can play every floodgate and any floodgate they want because Diagram and the Draco monsters and the True Draco spells and traps allow you to just pop whatever floodgate hurts you the most. So you can play TC Boo. My list personally plays TC Boo, Rivalry, and goes in, and you still have access to cards like Erupt and Skill Drain, Anti-Spell, Imperial Order, and no floodgate can really hurt you because you can always turn them off. And that's where the deck is just the best floodgate deck. And it also is one of the best going second deck. It doesn't really have bad matchups. A lot of back row decks and even decks like Draco don't really necessarily have bad matchups because naturally they're able to break boards, and a lot of these boards mainly have just monster negation, so it makes it even easier for trap decks to crack through them. But it's also that a lot of the times it's really what hurts them is post side decking. But that's where a good deck builder is going to compensate for that weakness. So Draco's really strong. Tributing a trap and summoning a Draco to a fully established board answers so many, it just answers a lot of boards right now. It's one of the best going second decks. It's really, really powerful. Plays high impact cards. It grinds forever. You can play Mystic Mine. The deck doesn't really care about the dice roll, and it auto wins just by flipping floodgates, and you just don't have an out. It's really good. It's definitely one of the better decks. Even though it's boring and people hate it for a reason. It's been hit on the ban list multiple times for a reason. It cannot be allowed to get Diagram back to 3, and it cannot be allowed to have Knuckle at 3, and you cannot allow this deck to get Masterpiece again. Because Flunders would immediately be outshined, and no one would even choose Flunders over Draco. Draco is actually still the better deck, even though some people feel Flunders is better. The truth of the matter is, Draco just doesn't lose to any of the cards Flunder loses to, at all. So I personally feel Draco's the better tribute deck, regardless of how new this deck is and how flashy it is, and it's flying penguins and it's birds, and it's not what we're used to, so everybody thinks it's broken just because they're not used to it and they're bored of what's currently out. Draco's just superior, in my opinion. The only reason why I'm not putting it any higher on the tier list is just because Flunder has been performing better because Draco's not as popular. If the results weren't there, Like if Flunder kind of flopped the moment it came out and never really did anything, Draco would be in the spot Flunder's in, because Draco is the better deck in my opinion. Dinosaurs. Dinosaurs is another solid tier 2 deck. I'm going to put it behind Plunder for now. I think this deck has a lot of room for growth. There's so many different variants, whether it's artifacts, whether you're playing the Samoric Barrier Statue build, whether you're playing the Scrap Engine. I mean, the deck is just really strong. Misses at 1, but I mean, any deck on this list that has cards on the ban list, you should already know that this deck, even if it's not good right now, there's a reason. That's because Konami did something to address it, to balance out its power so that the new decks that they made can be more easily accessed, because people feel like the better choices are pay to win at that point. Not pay to win, but, you know, to buy the new cards that Konami's releasing. So they do that a lot. They'll hurt decks purposely to sell new product, and that kind of happened a lot to Dinos. Not once, but multiple times. But they're still in a really good spot. They have arguably the best main deck boss monster that a lot of people have ever seen. I mean, boss monsters like Ultimateness and Perfection are, you know, they're ahead of their time. For a long time, they were ahead of their time. And this deck has a card that's in their league. You know, Ultimate Conductor Tyranno is in that league. He's not in a league of his own, but there's very few boss monsters that can even be considered, like, even comparable to that card. The deck has a really good main deck utility. The ability to just break boards without accessing your extra deck can be a big deal. And that's just like Draco's, because, you know, people are playing artifact cards, and Eldritch and Geist don't always care, you know, but decks like Adderrock do care about their extra deck. But then you have like Dinos and Draco, where they're like, we care, but we don't need our extra deck to play. And the other thing is just the deck's inherent ability to break boards is sometimes better than its ability to make boards. But it's one of those decks that don't really care about a dice roll, because it can be just as good going first or second. So it's very versatile, and I like when decks are versatile. Like Dracos can do that, Plunders can do that. You know, Geist and Eldritch can do that. Adderrock can do that. There's a lot of good decks on this list that can go second and go first. But like Dinos is, I think, a little bit better than pretty much all of them in that regard, that it can do what it wants to do in any situation. It doesn't really matter who wins the dice roll, who's going first, because if the deck goes second, there's a lot of decks that can steamroll. Just because Miss is at 1 doesn't mean Miss doesn't exist, and I think people forget that. And Small World is like a whole nother fossil dig for this deck. Like Small World existing just makes the deck more consistent, and it really needed that, because it needs cards like Prosperity and Small World. Like, just when you get to see Miss going second, it's just insane. Going first, it's insane. The boards are really, really nuts. The recovery might not be the best in the world, but the boards can be so oppressive that oftentimes you don't really get into the mid game. You know, it's closed out pretty early. So Dinos are really good. I wouldn't say they have the best matchups all around, but I mean, hard drawing UCT and being able to summon him going second is just that surprise factor. Like, example, if you're against the Perfection build and you've traded with negates and you just hard summon UCT and smack him, I mean, dude, it feels really nice. You know, the deck, it's going to have its ups and downs, but I think Dinos are just so much stronger than people give them credit for. I'm going to take a quick drink. Because I don't want to do this video on a dry throat. 30 minutes in. All right. So the next deck we're going to talk about is Grid Manju. I'm going to put it way down here. Well, I'm going to put it in tier 3, but I know it's very low tier 3. I don't have a lot to say about this deck. I just don't think that this is a deck. I feel like it's like Dragon Link. It's not really an archetype. It's just a pile of cards. And spoiler alert to those of you who have believed this entire time that Dragon Link has been a deck. The only time Dragon Link was a deck was when it was Rocket Dragon Link, playing the Rocket cards, using the Unchained Link to pop them and trigger their effects. That's when it was an archetype. Slowly but surely, people just trimmed more and more of the actual archetype away and just started throwing in all the good dragon cards. So that's not an archetype. And this, to me, is just not an archetype. It's not a deck. There's better going second decks than this anyways. And even decks that can one-hit you and kill you in one turn, you know. There's just better decks to OTK. You know, there's decks that can actually be more flexible going first with just engine, and you don't really have to... Because with Grid Manju, you have to build it one way or the other. And if you try to build it both, you're going to have hands that conflict. Some people play a stun build, some people play out hardcore going second deck. If you really wanted to just OTK people, you're better off playing Heroes or Cyber Dragons. Or anything, really. I mean, the deck, I just think it's a terrible deck. I'm not going to say a lot. Grid Manju fans, I'm sorry. You can disagree, And that's totally fine. That's the thing. You're allowed to disagree because remember what I said in the video. Our opinions are truly what matters the most when it comes to determining a deck's tier and its worth. Because no invisible people decided that Drytron was tier 1. We as a player base and as a community all decided that Drytron was tier 1 and vice versa. So just because I say it's tier 3, you can disagree and I'm not going to argue with you because everybody has to have an opinion. You can't just side with what people say just because. You know, you have to do your own research and you have to do your own testing and get your own experience. Formulate your own opinion. And that's where it's going to matter the most. Because when you agree with someone after you formulated your own opinion, that's where I feel like it resonates better. Versus, oh, I just think it's bad because somebody told me it's bad. You know, so again, you don't have to listen to me. But another deck that I kind of think is Cheeks, that I can kind of get out the way fast because I think it was a big disappointment for a lot of us, was the Cyberdark archetype. Cyberdarks are definitely tier 3. They were so close to being where Grinmaju is, but I will put them over Grinmaju because they can do a lot more. They're a bit more flexible, and their toolbox comes fully, for me, out of Cannon and Claw. If Cannon and Claw didn't have the effects that they had in damage calc, this deck would be Cheeks as just a pure archetype. You have to splash something into it or just splash it into something. It's lacking in so many areas. I just can't even, I don't even want to sit here and talk about my major disappointment. Yes, it's still a good deck because like I said, there's no bad decks, but I feel after you get a structure deck, for the problems that your deck had in the first place to not be addressed after you get a structure deck years later, that's like a slap in the face. Like that's like them making a hero structure deck and just printing a bunch of fusions that are just repeat. Oh wait, they do that stuff. They make a bunch of heroes with the same effect. So never mind. Let me shut up. They do this all the time. So yeah, Cyberdarks were a disappointment because I just wanted them to be able to do more with less and with the ability to navigate better. But they truly just inherently they're just weaker than a lot of decks because they can't play through enough. They're not really that good going second and then going first. You know, their boards can be mediocre, but as long as you can survive, you can snowball a lot of advantage and you can control the board state really well with the deck. But there's just other decks that do what this deck is trying to do and they actually just succeed at it. So next we'll talk about Octobotics. I am going to put Octobotics over these because I think Octobotics it's just a better deck, honestly. It has a better engine. It has the ability to navigate boards going second. It has really powerful boss monsters. And although you may make unfavorable trades with your opponent, giving them a resource just to trigger maybe your king or queen, at the end of the day, I feel that the gimmick of the deck is not as bad or as... It's not going to put you in as many disadvantageous situations as, per se, Plunders, where you kind of need your opponent to have something specific to go off, where this deck can just give the opponent what it needs to thrive. Like, if Plunders can make your opponent get an attribute that you need, it'd be better. So, I feel like this deck's niche. Yeah, like, some people don't like giving your opponent card advantage, but economically speaking, the deck can gain and maintain the advantage that it starts with, and it can almost snowball with the new support from the Reptilians. I think the deck just has a whole nother dimension now to what it can do going first and going second. I mean, it's able to play through Appaloosa a lot easier now, and it's breaking boards way better than it was before. And having access to needle fiber combos, it gives it that degeneracy that it didn't have before. It really didn't have degeneracy, and I feel like decks need something unfair to just... they just need a win condition, per se. Decks just need something unfair. Every deck has to have something unfair. You can't really be too fair unless you're like Sky Strikers, right? You can just be allowed to be fair if you're Sky Strikers and nobody can really take that from you. But I'm definitely going to put them over these. I feel like they can do better in the format that we're in now, and they can play a lot of really, really good non-engine cards. Speaking of Prankids, we're going to go... Prankids is tier 2, but Prankids is also very high tier 2. Prankids is definitely not going to go over Draco. And I'm not even like a diehard true Draco player, but I'm just telling you guys right now. I'm telling y'all, dude. Like, let me say this in case Dueling Book decides to like shut off on me or start loading up or something like that. But Prankids are not in as bad of a place as people think. The Meow Meow hit matters in these particular scenarios. Hand Trap Wars, where you didn't open good and all you have is a prank. That means that you're on your follow-up, you're just not going to normal summon and make a meow. And then when you combo on your opponent's turn and you set up your Rip Roaring or your Battle Butler, and your opponent finds a way to miraculously clear your field. Now your recovery phase, you're going to need to rely on that pranks that you searched in your main combo to make a token, and then normal summon a prank, and then make doodle. So it's not the end of the world. And there's also really cool tech cards like the Arc Nemesis monster that allows you to recycle Meow. And then there is the fact that you can literally just put Meow back with your pranks if you don't want to be greedy with your board wipes. Because the reality of it is pranks, where they excel is that, for one, they're the only one-card combo deck on this entire list who has a one-card combo that doesn't lose to Valor or Infinite Impermanence or Ghost Spell. You'll still get cards even if they Ghost Spell you. Two, prank kids can play way more hand traps than a lot of other decks, which allows them to make even more favorable trades even if their engine isn't enough to beat you outrightly. That's why this deck is so good. Because when you have a Raigeki or a double Raigeki, that in itself is already too much for a lot of decks to play through. But then you pair that with a lot of defensive cards, like hand traps, and the fact that this deck can play Mystic Mine as a 3-of, and an entire win condition separate from its own archetype. Having access to cards like Abyss Dweller, totally awesome. And the sheer utility from the extra deck through its link climbing abilities. Prank kids are so much stronger than people give it credit for. I feel like when decks get hit on the ban list, people automatically have this brain dead assumption that deck's just dead. Prank kids are just not. The reason why they have such good matchups against almost everything is because the amount of defensive and non-engine cards they can play. They can make up for the weakness that they have, being that their normal sim is a choke spot, because they have so much space in their deck. The engine in itself, it can be even 21 cards depending on how you build it. That means you have 19. If you're playing Perfect 40, that's 19 cards that you can. They can be any 19 you want them to be. And there's quite a few decks like Pranks that can do that in the terms of deck building. So Prank kids are really strong, you guys. Definitely not dead. And they're so much stronger than a lot of other tier 2 decks. Definitively, this was a tier 1 deck. Meow Meow came to 1 and people were like, oh, it's dead. But I disagree with them, and I'm allowed to disagree. Dragon Link. Dragon Link's going to be the first tier 1 deck we talk about. I'm going to go ahead and grab Gokis and slide them, and kind of make some space. Our placeholder for tier 3 Steel Heroes, our placeholder for tier 2 is now True Draco, because they have taken like the place where Plunders was, being like the top of tier 2. Our tier 1 placeholder is Altergeist. Our tier 1.5 placeholder is Altergeist. First tier 1 deck we're going to talk about is Dragon Link. This is the oldest tier 1 deck. It's been meta longer than pretty much every deck on it. I mean, Dinosaurs and like Salads have had a good run too, but the thing is, Dragon Link is... It was like right after Eternal format. It wasn't even that long after Eternal format, but like Dragon Link's been around for a very long time, and there's never been a format where it wasn't meta. That's the thing. And it's been hit by multiple ban lists. So that in itself is a testament to how good this deck is. Not a lot of decks can take what Konami throws at them and just roll with the punches and continue to thrive. No matter what format, no matter what deck it is, no matter who's the best deck to beat, Dragon Link can beat it. More often than not with pure engine and no hand traps. It excels at playing through disruptions. It plays extremely well under pressure. It's very consistent. Your combos require very little commitment. You have room for hand traps. The deck's very flexible and adaptive to different formats. That statement that I just used is going to be repetitive in certain tier 1 decks that I talk about, because there's a lot of decks who have a lot of room for growth. They're adaptive to different formats, and they can excel in a lot of environments. Dragon Link excels in almost every environment. It doesn't matter if it's a combo format, a control format. It doesn't matter if it's a mixture of both. Dragon Link is always going to be a solid choice. That's why a lot of people go back to it. It's not the easiest to play. It requires a lot more skill, but I believe that its ability to just come back in situations where other decks can't, and how even though its boards aren't the scariest, I'm sorry that I burped, I've just, I'm drinking some juice right now. Even though its boards aren't the scariest, it can do it navigating through more hand traps than a lot of other combo decks can. And even the hand traps that arguably should in its turn, it can literally just play through them depending on how you open and how you built the deck. So the archetype's just incredible. The Rocket archetype. And then all the dragon cards that you throw in it that make it the quote-quote Dragon Link deck are literally just all gas. So the deck's very explosive. It's the first tier 1 deck for sure. I mean, it's not going to have the best Drytron matchup, Shaddoll matchup, or Flunderies matchup. And it's also not going to really be able to do much without its extra deck. But despite all odds, Dragon Link's just like Striker. It's really resilient. and it has a strong backbone. It finds a way, no matter what format, it just always finds a way to squeeze its way into the top cut. And that's the respect that I have for it, and that's why I would never put it any lower than tier 1. Also, I play some of its cards in my Dragon Maids, so the fact that just playing a little bit of the Rocket cards in my Dragon Maids did that much for it, I just respect the deck even more. Tier 2, I'm going to put Unchained in tier 2. I'm going to put them right under Dinosaurs. I have a lot of respect for Unchained. I think it's a great anti-meta deck. I think it's a good meta call. It depends on what you want. Like, a lot of the times, you can just play a hard, like a blind going second build with it, and it's super good. When it's able to chain block, it trades extremely well with cards like Appaloosa and Dragoon, and the fact that you can put bodies that literally can just chew through your opponent's resources and disruptions, and you can always make favorable trades because when you're summoning, for example, a 3k body that kills a card and your opponent negates it but doesn't destroy it, then that 3k body attacks over a monster, and then you use it to link summon, which that link will then take another resource from your opponent. This deck just trades really good. It's really good against trap decks. It systematically picks back rows apart. It has really good recovery, and it has the floating capabilities of a Yang Zing deck, which makes it very annoying sometimes. Even when you have kill pressure or you have lethal, this deck will survive a lot of the times. Its trap cards are really good. Its spell cards are incredible. Its extra deck monsters are simple enough to get the job done. The deck's just very effective. It plays really good hand traps. It can play a lot of hand traps. It doesn't really care about Dimensional Shifter, which is a big deal. Any deck that can play D-Shifter normally doesn't care about D-Shifter. So if it doesn't care about D-Shifter, you should be playing D-Shifter in the deck. Unchained is really good. I don't have a lot of bad to say about it. I have had a lot of experience playing the deck, and it's really good. The people that play this deck, you'll see them playing against high tier 1 decks and doing really well. There's not bad that you can really say about it. You have to play it to understand it, but it's simple enough that even a Tri-Brigade player couldn't mess up playing this deck. We are going to talk about Brave, but it's just going to be as an engine, it's tier 1. I think Brave is... Speaking of engines, I think Brave, any deck that can play Brave or DPE or Dragoon, either or, like, should be playing them. Winda, the Shadal engine's very popular. These are all tier 1 engines, like the Needle Fiber package with Despots and Cupid Pitch and the Search Target off of her, Auroradon. All of these packages and engines are tier 1 quality, being that the results that they produce, more often than not, just win you the duel just off the bat. So I think that Brave as an engine, Shadal's, Invoke, Dogmatica, the Enforcer engine, and concerning Enforcer versus Dragoon, Dragoon is not even objectively the better card. Dragoon is the better card, but the requirements to make him, are more of an impediment on your deck building than the Enforcer is. So Enforcer has a better package with less drawbacks, but Dragoon has a higher risk, but the risk is higher because the reward is higher, and that's how Yu-Gi-Oh is. A lot of the times, you will be playing Risk. It's a card game, and it's almost like a gamble at times, and the risk that the risk that you're taking will oftentimes pay off for you if you're ballsy enough, and Dragoon's is a very ballsy card. He's definitely stronger than Enforcer. Like, there's not really a way that Enforcer would ever hold a candle to him. Enforcer just provides interactions that Dragoon cannot. For example, popping cards like Scythe, outing your own floodgates, the recursion and inevitability of him, and the fact that his engine comes with 2 cards with really powerful graveyard effects like Celestial, Dasher, or Plasma. So like I said, he's not a better card than Dragoon, but his engine, it's much lower of a risk to play, and honestly, you get more advantage and you get favorable resources from playing him. So it's more of a benefit to play him from the standpoint of the cards that you use to make him. But when you compare just flat out boss monster to boss monster, Dragoon eats this card alive. And I like Dragoon better as a card. I think that there's very few specific cards that can out Dragoon, whereas Enforcer can be killed by virtually everything. So even though he floats, I'm just saying that. So yeah, these are all tier 1, and Brave's a tier 1 engine. And that actually is going to bring me to Phantom Knights, because when I think Brave, I think Phantom Knights, and I just think about how this deck just doesn't even make sense why it's doing so well. Well, it does, because I'm a Phantom Knight player and I understand, but it doesn't make sense how this deck just took over. Because honestly, Phantom Knights, a lot of people feel like this is the best deck right now, and it's really hard to disagree with them, because I have a strong opinion about this deck as well. I think it's such a great deck. I think it's so... Not only is it good, it has favorable meta matchups. There's a lot that you can do in the terms of building it. It's very flexible. It has a lot of wiggle room, and then at the same time, the sheer composition of your combo is the equivalent. It like equates to warrior combos. Two bodies of the same similarity just can get you combo. Two dragons in Dragon Link. Two warriors in a warrior deck. Two level 3s in a Phantom Knight deck. Those kind of combos are very consistent and reliable because naturally you don't really have to open specific cards. You just need two of the same kind of card, which means there's so many cards that you can only play that allow you to get access to that. So the deck is way more consistent than almost every meta deck right now. It even opens more often than not. It's like the only deck right now that can't really brick. Even Bird Up will brick at times and Dragon Link will brick, but Phantom Knights can't really brick. They're just way too consistent. They thrive right now. They can thrive in almost every format. They're adaptable. And I feel like knowing the meta matters more for when you're playing decks like Striker and Shaddolls because their toolbox is diverse. But for Phantom Knights, even if you don't know your matchups and you don't know the meta well, the deck's still just going to excel so well. It makes just incredibly good inboards. Its grind game is exceptional. It's not the best, but it's definitely head and shoulders above a lot of other decks' resources and their follow-ups. It plays through so many hand traps, so many negations. There's not really a definitive choke point. It's a deck that can be drolled and Lanceia'd and actually keep playing through them. Even if you don't full combo, the deck can play through Nibiru. It can play through low impact hand traps. You can play through hand traps when your Rusty actually doesn't resolve. You can keep going. I mean, the deck's just really, really strong. And the Brave engine, along with Enforcer and the Artifact engine, took the deck to a whole nother level. Now, its inboard just beats everything that's not Flunder, because every other meta deck that's not Flunder relies on their extra deck to a large degree. Well, if it's not Flunder or a trap deck, but everything else is going to struggle. I mean, Strikers, you might not want to use Scythe against Strikers because you will end up regretting that because they'll just Shark Cannon your Scythe and put you on like a infinite in-turn loop. But I think Phantom Knights are really, really resilient, very strong. Their inboards don't lose to Dark Ruler, and now they're not even playing into Dark Ruler anymore. So droplets and challenge, my friend, because hand traps are not going to do it all the time. And that's how I feel about Phantom Knights. They're really strong. They just do so much. And the way you build them, you can see totally different lists. Isolde lists that don't play Enforcer or Dragoon. Dragoon lists that don't play Enforcer. Enforcer lists that don't play Dragoon. Shoot, lists that play Brave, lists that don't. I mean, dude, I'm playing a list with like 20 hand traps that doesn't play Brave or Enforcer. And because it can be built so different, I just feel like that's another good thing about the deck. You don't have to play it the same way. Like, for example, when you play like Dragon Link and Drytron, there's a lot of cards that you just can't skip. You have to play at least that minimum before you even try and do anything innovative or nifty or creative. Phantom Knights, I mean, dude, you can build them a ton of different ways, and every single way is good. There's no bad way to play the deck. It truly is just that good. It's tier 1 for sure. It's in a better spot than Dragon Link, even though Dragon Link, if we're talking about full power Dragon Link, there's a very good argument that could be made of Dragon Link being better. Dragoonities, tier 1.5 deck, and I personally am going to put it over Adamans. I really want to put it over Eldritch and Geist, but they've just been doing better. But I will say, as a tier 1.5 combo deck, Dragoonity offers the most unfair board that I've personally seen. The only deck that I know of that could do that was my Pendulum list from back in the day. And that's inboard with 3 to 4 negations and an Amorphate Sloth with Lechery, which means, yes, you may be able to play through these 3 or 4 negations, but can you do them without your extra deck, and can you do them without activating spell cards? That means you don't get a free Dark Ruler or a Droplets. You have to actually try and break the board. And even Dinos are going to struggle, because oftentimes if you just negate the Misk, I mean, that's the other thing that I forgot to mention with Dinos is like, they actually can play through a lot when they open Lost World and Miscellaneous Saurus. Like this deck, I mean, Lost World itself cuts off Evenly and Lightning Storm and Gamma, and it forces Imperms and Veilers immediately. So, like, Lost World is really broken in this deck, and it allows you to combo through Droll and Lancia with Dinos. So, Dinos are, I forgot to mention that when I talked about them, but Dinos are just a powerhouse. They really are. They really are. And they're one of the few decks that could even break those kind of boards where they're the only ones that have, like, a chance. Like, Drytrons can't do it because they can't use spells, so they can't even Ritual Summon for their Draco Nids and just go, I'm at 4K, I'm attacking everybody. You can't even do that. Dragoonity's inboard is the most unfair inboard right now. out of all the combo decks. Its inboard's better than my Dragon Maid inboard. It's better than the Dragon Link. It's better than the Drytron. It might not have the follow-ups that Drytron has, but it has a much more unfair inboard. It's very consistent. It navigates through hand traps extremely well. It navigates through hand traps as good as a Dragon deck can, but better. It can play under the Barrier Statue, but I think that the Barrier Statue is just not a good choice. So even though decks have an advantage with the Barrier Statue because they can summon winds and kill it, but it's the fact that so many decks can is the reason why I feel like people just should not be playing the Barrier Statue unless they're playing Flunders. But yeah, Dragoonity can do a lot without its extra deck as well. And it can also utilize the Barrier Statue. It can search it and summon it on the same turn. The deck is just so diverse, and it's borderline bonkers because there's a lot of cards. There's like a lot of abusive cards that the deck can play, and there's a lot of utility, and it's really good going second. It has win conditions in time. It pressures established boards. Dragoonities are very scary. They're scarier than Dragon Link. They're more consistent in my opinion. Dragon Link's just been doing better. But Dragoonity's tier 1.5 without a doubt. This deck is on the rise. If you don't play it now, you probably want to at least give it a try because it's so much better than a lot of people even know of. Most people just think this deck is a joke, but it's really not. Math Mechs. This is a solid tier 3 deck. I'm going to put it over Heroes. I think Math Mechs better. I think Mech Knights is kind of like Dinos. They don't really care about going first or second a lot of the time. Their engine is just so strong. Just like Code Talkers, Math Mechs utilize Ibly. So that means you're cutting off access, kind of like the Lost World thing with Dinos. You're cutting off access to cards like Lightning Storm, Evenly Matched. You're forcing Gamma early. You're cutting off Infinite Impermanence. You're preventing Nibiru interactions. And you're locking your opponent essentially out of special summoning because they can't make a Link 2 if you extra link them. And they also can't crash the Ibly if you have Salamangreat Sanctuary. So yeah, it's a really good inboard. And you're always going to have Super Factorial to keep that pressure and follow-up via Cyberse Wicked. The deck's just really good. Math Mechs is a deck that you have to see in action to understand because a lot of people don't know what this deck does. It's really hard to hand trap because, again, people don't know what it does. When you have that factor, until the deck becomes popular, it's always going to have that ability to inherently play through hand traps better than it should be able to because people don't hand trap it correctly. That's why when decks first come out, they thrive for a little bit more than they should because people are not hand trapping them correctly. And once you learn how the deck sequences properly, then you learn where your hand traps matter the most. And it's not that the deck's going to get nerfed. It's just that then the deck's not going to be able to play through more hand traps than it had any business playing through. Like this deck has no business playing through that many, but it's in a really good spot. For example, its inboard pretty much beats everything that's not Flunder. And it also it can search a counter trap to kill Dark Ruler no more. It's gonna break boards really good going second playing the Kaijus. It sets up Omni Negates. Its boss monsters are all really good. All the extra deck cards are really good. So I think because it's that good going first or going second, it's a good meta call because it utilizes Ibly. I feel like it's worthy. It has a lot more flexibility and diversity than Heroes, and it gets interruptions that are stronger. Even though Dark Law is just a crazy card, I just think this deck's better. Tier 3, high tier 3. Infernoids are a tier 2 deck. I'm going to put them over Unchained, but I can't give them the cake over Dinos just because Dinos can do a lot of the unfair things that not that they're more unfair than Noids, because Noids are a lot more unfair than a lot of decks on this list, but just that Dinos have the consistency factors. Infernoids, like Dinos, just don't really need their extra deck. Sometimes they need it just to fuel their grave, but their boss monsters are all they really need. Like the Mommy and Daddy are insane. You have board wipes, spot removals for every form of spot removal you could think of, targeting, non-targeting. A spot removal you can't respond to. The ability to negate anything. DD Crow, the archetype. The most powerful spells that I've seen in a very long time. The void spells and traps. The deck is not very consistent and it loses more often to itself because it's inherently going to brick based on the archetype-specific cards you choose to play. But when the deck gets to go off, it feels really, really comfortable. It's very strong. It's very powerful. It can get really scary, especially in matchups like Drytron and Phantom Knights, which are meta matchups. Shaddolls, Infernoids can really catch you slipping. And Sky Strikers, tributing the Sky Striker and Link monsters for cost with Lair of Darkness does not allow Ray to come out. Cost is not a card effect. It's totally different. And you're banishing Ray anyways, but still, it's crazy. I feel like the archetype, if it had the amount of starters that, let's say, even Dinosaurs, if it just had 12 starters, it would be a lot better. The thing with Infernoids is your starters are restricted based on whether you go first or second. Imagination's only a starter if you go second, and Void Feast is only a starter if you go first. So no matter what you choose on the dice roll, your consistency is always going to be diminished a bit, and that really holds the deck back too, because you have to build it one or two ways. You either go first and focus on Feast, or you go second and Void Imagination goes Burr. But I think it's a really strong deck. It's more unfair than a lot of other decks, and it has that outright scary factor where nobody really wants to play against it. It can just kill it breaks a lot of boards. Like, Void Imagination is actually stronger than Shaddoll Fusion, and some people might not agree with me, but I play Shaddolls and I know, because I use Void Imagination to search Shaddoll Fusion, so it's 100 times better for the simple fact that it does everything that it does and still accesses Shaddoll Fusion anyway. So it has a card in its archetype that can break almost every single board that the meta can make right now, so it's really good. Cold Talkers is a very solid deck. I'm going to put them even over Dinos and Plunders. Cold Talkers is not being talked about a lot, but the people that play it and understand how this deck works knows this deck is crazy. Extra linking with Ibly, with Omni Negates and Firewall bounces, recovery, follow-up, playing through hand traps like a madman. People just not knowing how to just sequence their interruptions against this deck. It's really hard to beat this deck because, oh man, especially once you get the codec up, it's just obnoxious because this deck chain blocks for eternity. It's like if Shaddolls chain blocked with every card they activated. Like, Cold Talkers are very, very powerful. Their inboard is super scary. You really don't want to play against this deck, especially if you like to special summon. The deck can just cut you off of the game. It sets up multiple interruptions. It can lock you out your zones. It has negations through the wazoo. It's very, very consistent, and most of its plays are being chain blocked every single time. The only hand trap that really matters is going to be Droll and maybe Shifter if you could play it. All the other hand traps, either Ibly stops them or the deck plays through it naturally. So it's in a really good spot. Cold Talkers are very cray-cray. I like Math Mechs better, but I can't take it away from Cold Talkers because Cold Talkers can take the stuff that makes Math Mech good and just throw it in their deck. Whereas Math Mech would struggle to take everything Cold Talkers have because like the extra deck space. So I think Cold Talkers can use the Math Mech cards and still be the deck that they are. And you can play quite a few non-engine cards, which is another huge strength. You play so many hand traps. It's in a really good spot. I love Plunders, but I have to say Cold Talkers do take the cake over these. It's really strong. You test it out yourself and see. Evil Twins, I'm going to put it, it's going to be really, really low. I'm not going to lie. I feel like the deck is really consistent, and it can play a lot of hand traps, so you have the allure and the appeal of like a prank kid deck, right? Your combos only require one card. You have consistent extenders that can play through virtually every hand trap that would stop your combo if your opponent doesn't hand trap you right. I mean, you really don't hand trap the normal summon and just catch them on one of their links, and it's going to be a lot harder for them to play through it. The other thing too is like not about the whole stopping your opponent from playing, but the fact that when the Evil Twin deck does get to play, its engine just doesn't do enough. I feel like it's just not strong enough. You have to have hand traps. It's like how I feel about Tri Brigade. You can't play the deck without hand traps if you're playing pure because its engine's not good enough. And that's why I think that's just a trash tier 1 deck. I don't even know why it's tier 1. But Life Twins are like a low tier 2 deck for me because when the deck goes uninterrupted, like just think about it. Perfect world, you get to play Solitaire. Everybody wishes they could do that. Your engine is not going to provide enough interruptions to beat almost every deck. A pop and a draw is really good, don't get me wrong. But it's not ending anyone's turn unless they're playing Prank Kids and they open bad, More often than not, it's not enough. The deck's draw power helps because you're able to draw hand traps a lot better, You can get like 2 draws every turn, which helps you because you kind of need the draws to draw more hand traps. When you have to use hand traps and a 1-card engine that just generates advantage, it feels more like the deck itself is not strong enough to where you have no choice but to play hand traps. Some decks play hand traps because they can. Other decks play hand traps because they need to, because their inboards aren't strong enough. And then there's the generic reason where people just want to be able to go second and simplify the game state. But I will say, like, when a deck has to, it's not always bad, because some decks just need to play hand traps because not because their inboard's bad, because their inboard's good, but it just gives them that extra protection to where if their inboard gets outed, they can still use the hand traps to play defensively. But this deck absolutely relies on them like a crutch, and that's what I really feel like sets it so low on tier 2. I just think it's not really good at all. And not that it's a joke, I just don't really think the deck's that great. I like it though. You can play so many tech cards, and that's the fun part about it, is building it. But when you get to playing it, you start realizing the hard reality. Adignisters are going to be right above Cold Talker. So Agnisters, I feel like, is virtually the consistency on these decks is almost the same. I feel like you don't break that often playing these decks. And these two have more space for hand traps and defensive cards. I think that the Prinkids engine is better, but this deck's inboard can be more terrifying. But the other thing too is the low impact hand traps that affect this deck don't affect Prinkids. Like Imperm Veiler doesn't affect this deck. Imperm Veiler can end this deck's turn if you hit the Templar. People always hit Influent, but I think a lot of people figured out that if you hit Templar and Agnister, it's really hard for them to play through that. Because that's the big point where a lot of the resources they've committed come back to them. And, I mean, the deck is still good, though. Its inboard is crazy. It sets up really good follow-up. It plays through interruptions in the mid. I would say it's in between. It's not great, but it's not the worst. I think going second, it can be terrifying going second with this deck because it's not very good at breaking boards. When your opponent knows how to stop the deck. I feel like if Adagnisters was more popular and people played against it more, it wouldn't be as good because the truth of the matter is, like, once you learn how to play against this deck, it's relatively easy to stop. But if you draw Insane with this deck, even if you hit it at the right points, it'll still be able to keep extending. It has some really powerful spells at its disposal, and because it's Cyburst, you inherently have the access code OTK at your disposal if you need to, and the consistency's there. The amount of hand traps that it can play makes up for its lack and inability to navigate breaking boards going second, but that's also a big factor for a lot of decks that are similar to this, where they might not be as aggressive as, let's say, Dinosaurs, but they can simplify the game state with hand traps, and they're able to play enough hand traps to where they have a high probability of drawing multiple. And a lot of decks need that right now, because there's quite a few inboards that just don't care about Dark Ruler. So we're this far in. Earth Machine. Earth Machine's another great tier 2 deck. I have to say I will give Earth Machine the cake over the... I'll put it over Adagnister, I'm not gonna lie. I have to give Earth Machines the cake. It's a great deck. Earth Machines and Bee Troopers are actually really, really high, in my opinion. Like these decks, like Bee Trooper's missing a lot more than Earth Machine, so I'm gonna put Bee Trooper here, because I still think Adagnisters... Well, I'm not gonna lie, Bee Trooper's better going second, and even though Adagnisters can end on that towers, they have like their own pseudo towers as well. It might not be as good, but it's the fact that they have something that's reminiscent of what this deck does, and they have searchable unfair cards like the C hand traps, Contact C and Retaliating C. Contact C auto win certain matchups, Retaliating C auto win certain matchups. It has a really good Shadal matchup, really good Prinket matchup. It has a really good Invoke. No, I think a lot of Invoke people are playing Verde, but it still has a really good Invoke matchup because of Retaliating C. We're going to talk about Earth Machine. I kind of like drifted off, but yeah, Earth Machine's really, really strong, you guys. It's very consistent. Its ability to navigate through negations is kind of like Adagnisters. If you know how to hand trap the deck, it can be a little bit troubling because a lot of people like Ash heavy forward or they Ash redeployment paying cost. The truth of the matter is, if you hit Brutal Dozer, that's where it becomes hard for the deck to keep pushing. It's able to do that, but if you open to only, like, let's say if you open 2 starters, that's where it matters the most. Like, when you know how to hand trap this deck, it's not going to play through as much. But for pretty much 90% of the population that don't know how to read Yu-Gi-Oh cards, the deck's going to play through more. It's kind of like the Math Mech, where I mentioned it has no business playing through what it's able to play through. That's just because people aren't studying the format enough. Because when you study the format, most people only go as far to study meta decks. That's why rogue decks always kick people's butts, because they just don't read. They don't read, and they're not willing to take this deck seriously enough to at least learn about it and how it works. And that's their fault. So when they lose, they deserve it. So I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, man, I feel bad for you, because I don't. You should have at least considered that there are other decks out there besides the 6 or 7 decks that you think are meta. But yeah, Earth Machine is a great deck. I feel like the amount of hand traps these decks can play is a big deal, but Earth Machine's engine grinds really well. It has main deck utility, so it can do a lot without its extra deck. You can search Psycho Reader for your Drytron matchup and other matchups like AVCs. I think the deck's really, really good. It just being a machine toolbox and accessing all these different XYZ boss monsters and having the oppression from the grinding loop of Fortress and Citadel, the deck's just really, really good. I love its trap cards. I really like just the way the deck operates. A lot of the times you set up a resource loop. That's why I put it right next to Bee Trooper, because these decks play very similar. They set up like this economic thing where they just get a snowball of advantage going in like a chain reaction, and they pretty much put up a board like Salad, where it's not broken, but it's not that fair. It's good enough for them to play defensively for a turn, and the resource follow-up that they get, these decks can out-resource you. You know, it's like they can accomplish something reminiscent of what Striker can do, where they can just literally out-resource you because their resources actually just continue to recur themselves. So they can recycle the cards that they use over and over and over to do the same combo every turn. And even though that can just be really boring to watch, the thing is that that's a really good playstyle. Because the decks that can do that and do it well, they don't have to be unfair at all. They can literally just throw their interruptions at you, and then you play through them, but then you have to play through them again. Then you have to play through them again. And it gets to a point where you're not going to be able to keep playing through the same interruptions. They're going to recur the same interruptions. They're going to throw it at you every turn. And this deck, I think, plays through Winda better. I think that can out Winda better. I think it has a better... I feel like it should just be over Earth Machine for the simple fact that it has a better... Flunderies matchup, a better Drytron matchup. It has a better Shadal matchup. That alone should put it over Earth Machine. Like, well, no, Earth Machine. Objectively, these decks both have a good Drytron matchup. This deck can search Cycle Reader. This deck has Retaliating Sea, which is only good when, you know, they activate a certain spell like Drytron Nova, for example, or the Ritual spell, you know. But at the same time, I just feel like the fact that you have like a searchable, basically Dark Law hand trap, which is a one-sided Macrocosmos that also searches you follow-up when it dies. It gives you so many auto wins in a lot of matchups. The Context T, I think the cards that this deck can search make it unfair, but the engine and the archetype itself, it's pretty fair. The counter trap's good, and I feel like Scary Moth is like a Winda, but it's just not the same kind of Winda, but it's still like a Winda, so you have more unfair tools. Like, the utility that that deck offers, I feel like its toolbox has a bit more like vastness or diversity to it than Earth Machines, but both of the decks have a lot of similarities. That's why I have them so close to each other. I think Earth Machines can play less, they can play more non-engine cards, because Beat Troopers, a lot of times, the way it's built, you can play like 9 or 12 hand traps, but a lot of times you play so much combo pieces that you don't really have a lot of room for flexibility, but it's all in how you build it. Because you can just cut down on extra copies of cards that you want to see, and it might hurt the consistency a little bit, but help you a lot going second. But I think Beat Trooper is really good. It's missing quite a bit, but just with what it has, it's good enough for it to just thrive. It's been doing really, really good, and you have to respect the deck. I think it's a lot better than a lot of people give it credit for, and I would say that it's very close between this and Earth Machine on which one could be better. In my opinion, I'm going to put Beat Trooper over Earth Machine for right now, because Beat Trooper has just some really good searchable unfair cards that give it auto wins in certain matchups that are meta relevant. Whereas this deck can do kind of similar things, but it doesn't have that, you know. But I do think Citadel's crazy. I do think Fortress is broken. And I love this deck's extra deck toolbox. And I really like resource loops with box. You know, I like it. But Beat Troopers can do that stuff too. So, Salamangreat, definitely tier 3. It's rogue. It hasn't been in a good spot for a long time. I'm going to put it next to Heroes. I'm not going to talk a lot about Salads. If you guys played an Eternal format, I mean, it was pretty much Striker, Thunder, Orcus, but Salamangreat was in there. You know, Salad was hanging in there. Even though Striker, Thunder, Orcus were just, like, absolutely dominating. But Salamangreat was, like, you know, look at this little Dark Horse right here. It was like a Dark Horse. It's a really good deck. Don't get me wrong. Its engine's cool. I feel like it has a lot of stability with how it maintains the resources. Like, it maintains advantage. It doesn't gain advantage. Some decks, like, these decks maintain advantage, but they gain it too. Like, these decks, they have that snowball loop. Print kits have a snowball loop. You know, there's quite a few decks that can do that. But this deck, its graveyard is its hand pretty much every turn. Like, once you get Solid set up, you know, there's a lot of stuff you don't have to worry about anymore because your follow-ups are just so good. You can grind so well with this deck. I think that its boards are fair, but they're good enough. Baguska plus a counter trap, Dweller plus a counter trap, or Rage and Roar with the hand traps and a Sunlight Wolf, and it's recyclable, you know, being able to recycle Ash. I think there's a little bit of utility, not a lot. Foxy adding Floodgates. Ross Stalio is at 1, which is a big deal, but there's just a lot holding the deck back. I'm going to keep it here in tier 3, but I will say Salad has the potential, just like every other tier 3 deck, to top any event. Remember what I told you. Just because it's tier 3 doesn't mean it's not going to beat a tier 1 deck. And just because it's tier 1 doesn't mean it's not going to lose to a rogue deck. Salad's in the... And it just hasn't been in a good spot for a while, though. Speaking of Orcus, I am going to put Orcus over Octobotics. I think Octobotics have the consistency factor beat over Orcus, but Orcus shine in outright power. Like, Octobotic has more starters, but if Orcus gets going, it's the better deck. It really is. Orcus is the better deck comparatively, even over Salad. But Salad it's not only the consistency, but it's the fact that Salad doesn't really lose to low impact hand traps. Like Veilers and Imperms and Ghost Spells and stuff like that don't really end this deck's turn. Ironically enough, Nibiru can, but any other hand trap, Salad can play through it. So that's a good thing with Salad. It plays through hand traps better than Orcus and all the other decks. It plays through hand traps better than Heroes, but I feel like Heroes have something that Salads just don't have, which is a true win condition. Like, Access Code Talker is not really a win condition. It's just it's like a kill pressure, and every deck already has that. That's like saying any deck that makes Borosword, basically that's a win condition. And rightfully so, you can consider it that way, but if it makes sense, it doesn't really have a strategy to win the duel outside of trying to OTK you with access code or just out-resource you with its engine, just its recursion every turn. Orcus is really good. Obviously, it's very neutered right now, and it's not in a good position. It hasn't been for a while, but the utility's there. Just being able to toolbox dark machines like Jinzo, Orbital Hydralander, stuff like the Gizmek, the sheer power of Crescendo, Babel, just the ability to play on the opponent's turn, it's there. It's very reactive. It's very good at what it does. Once the Orcus engine's online, it's really good, you know. It doesn't really snowball, but it keeps its resources and follow-ups there. Galatea is a very strong card. Dingirsu is arguably just as broken as he's ever been, but what's holding the deck back is really itself right now. You know, it's not very good going second. It's not very consistent, and it doesn't really play through hand traps very well. So I can't really put it any higher, even though I want to because I like Orcus. Mech Knights. I have this Orcus card as a Mech Knight placeholder. Mech Knights are really good. I'm gonna put Mech Knights here. I'm going to put them over Noids and Unchained. They can be very unfair too, but what holds this deck back a lot of times is itself. I think the niche and the pseudo mechanic that it has is its biggest drawback, because the deck's really good. It can break boards with pure engine. It sets up a really, really powerful, not just multiple really powerful floodgates that prevent your opponent from being able to play the game. It's very consistent. It has good recovery and recursion. The decks, because of how the monsters work, being inherent summons instead of activations, the deck can be really good in certain situations against cards like Appaloosa. I think Mech Knights have potential splashable in decks like Crusadia, Invoke. Mech Knights really good. I don't really have a lot of bad to say about them because I think that they're a really strong deck, and in the right hands, you'll see Mech Knights just curb stomping people. But the problem with Mech Knights is once people get to start playing around them and understand how the deck works, it just gets worse and worse, because then you have to open very specific to be able to play the deck. You either need to get something in the extra monster zone, then sell a spell or trap there, and then summon. And it just becomes now like you have to do extra work just to be able to play your deck, and that's a really big deal. But I wouldn't say that Mech Knights are a bad deck. I think that they're so much better than a lot of other decks, and they have a lot of utility as well. And a lot of the World Legacy cards like Crown are very underrated to be played in this deck, and their trap is insane. Mech Knights are really, really good, you guys. They're very, very powerful and explosive deck, and their kill pressure is very high. It's very close to Dinos. They can just kill you out of nowhere, but once you start playing around them, it gets worse. The thing is, like, they are a lot more consistent than Unchained and Noids, and they have less problems. The problem is more their self than the hand traps, because there's not a lot of hand traps that really beat this deck. It actually plays through hand traps really well, and it has to be able to, honestly. Otherwise, you really couldn't play this deck effectively, because it's better as a going second strategy inherently, because you don't have to open specific all the time to be able to get your engine online. So inherently, the way it was designed by Konami, it's by nature able to play through disruptions naturally, and it's able to bait back rows and negations and hand traps. It's a really good deck. I think it should be right here. Zombies are going to be tier 3. I will put them definitely over Orcus, not over Salad. Zombies are good. I think Zombie Road's the biggest thing. It's the best card that this deck has. Zombie Road's just crazy. It just kills this deck. It kills this deck. It makes it hard for Drytron to even play. It cuts off Dinos and Tri-Brigade. Zombie Road's just a crazy floodgate. Like, if Trap Eldritch were woke, they'd be playing Zombie Road. I play Zombie Road in my Trap Eldritch. I don't even know why they don't play it. You can even just throw one Neck Road Banshee so that Sanguine can tutor out Banshee when you already have Eldritch up, just to get access to Zombie Road, because it literally wins you the duel by itself. But zombies, outside of Zombie Road, I feel like you know, they have cool cards like Bloom, Banshee, you know, Belladrock, Unizombie. They have cards that are very similar to other cards that exist. I think they're cool. They're a decent control deck. They're not really that great going second, and if the deck goes first, like Rivalry, Zombie World's crazy, Super Poly Zombie World's crazy. The combo build's pretty decent. Baroness the Floor, artifact cards, Eldritch Zombies. But Zombies as itself, without splashing anything, I just feel like it's right here. It's not the greatest, but at the same time, it's not like it can't win, you know. It definitely, like, this card also helps it out a lot. Zombie World's like a hard carry. Synchron's going to be over here. I'm going to put it over Cyber Darks because, like, these decks can both lose to one hand traps, but Synchrons at least have more the capability to make better boards, and honestly, I feel like Cyber Darks just don't really have like the level of extension that Synchrons have, and extenders are what plays through stuff, especially hand traps that don't trade with the bodies. That's what extenders allow you to do, and Cyber Dark doesn't really have like extenders. The pure deck itself, you can like extra normal, and that's a pseudo extender, but I think Synchrons just, because these decks have similar weaknesses, but Synchrons at least has a stronger engine and just better inboards. The Synchro mechanic has just so many boss monsters that you can access, and Synchrons can virtually summon all of them. So the deck can be very unfair. I feel like we need to find a way to make inboards without Junk Speeder or hand loop people, or just something that's not Junk Speeder Go Burr, because that's what really keeps the deck from shining any further. It has a few tops, and it does do well when you get to play Solitaire, but that's a lot of decks, so that can't really put it any. Oh, speaking of crazy decks, Mermails. Mermails, I'm actually going to put them in tier 2. I was going to put them in tier 3, and I was actually going to make them the king of tier 3, because I don't think there's any tier 3 deck that's better than Mermails, but I'm not going to do that to them. I'm actually going to put them in tier 2, and I'm going to put them I'm going to put them over Infernoid, and I'm talking about Deep Sea Atlantean Mermails. The deck is just gross. Going first, I mean, and that's the thing. Remember what I told you about, like, just because a deck can do broken things doesn't make the deck broken? Well, that's the thing. This deck does broken things. It does things that are more broken than what Infernoble can do. More broken than that. But it's also, its kill pressure going second. It plays through hand traps a lot better than other decks like Infernoble. And it has the innate ability to, like, just set up the negations that beat Dark Ruler. You can set up an Omni Negate before you start comboing. You have access to all of the water support. Even if you don't want to play it, it's available to you. So that alone just sets the deck in a league of its own, because it's like, Plunders can do it, but Plunders need to play a lot more engine card. Whereas like this deck, you can cut a lot of packages and then switch them for other packages. Like, you can trade a package. Like, you can play like the Swap Frog package and then take another package out. And I think where it really, like, the big weakness is you can't play a lot of non-engine cards. It's very wombo combo like Drytron, where if you do play defensive cards, you can play like 9 max. So you can't play a lot of hand traps, but it's really good at breaking boards, chain blocking, beating cards like Appaloosa. Neptibus per cost is pretty crazy. Whether you're playing Abyssteus alone or in not playing Megalo, the fact that Megalo is an option gives you the searchable negation for Dark Ruler and Droplets, and it's just really, really powerful. Like, this deck can hand loop you, put up more Omni Negates than you can play through. It sets up floodgates. You have access to the Umi support, the Shark cards. I mean, the fact that it can play all of the best water monsters, it's just in such a good spot. Mermails is a go-to deck for a lot of people too, and they don't know what to do, and it's a new format. It's very, very powerful. I call it Mermails, but the reality of it is it's become more of like a deep sea Atlantean deck than a Mermail deck. But I always call it Mermails because that's how it started off with, and that's how it should be. It's just so good, you guys. I'm going to put it here because I feel like it's really, really strong. It plays through a lot more hand traps than other... That's why I feel like it couldn't be in Tier 3, because the Tier 3 decks can't really play through hand traps the way this deck can. And this deck will just literally rip your hand apart. Like, if you hand trap it and it talents you and then Mooling Glacier gets dropped, you just need to pick your cards up. This deck's crazy. Madolches is a high Tier 2 deck as well. You know what? Let me do a Tier 1 deck, because I've only done 2. The next Tier 1 deck we're going to hit is... We're going to go ahead and go for Virtual Worlds. I'm going to give them the cake over Dragon Link, but not over Phantom Knight. I think Virtual Worlds really good. If it was as consistent as Phantom Knight, there could be a huge and a good debate on Virtual World being probably even over Drytron. Because if Virtual World was as consistent as Drytron, I think Virtual World could arguably be the best deck of the format. I think what really keeps it where it is, and it keeps its own self in check. Like, its consistency issues are what really holds it back, because its engine can break boards naturally by itself. It can navigate through hand traps so well, especially ones like Imperm and Valor. Like, decks like this and Drytron play through Imperm and Valor better than most, because it can't stop the plays that it makes. You know, it can only hit cards that it uses its resources to make. So more often than not, when you Imperm or Valor Drytron, they've already resolved Alpha, and they've already resolved Zeta. If you're playing against Virtual Worlds and you can Imperm or Valor them, you're hitting like Zolkin, you know what I mean? Like, it's already got its follow-up and resources and everything going already. You can't really prevent a board now. You're only going to simplify the board, but the board's still going to happen. Virtual World's very good. Qinglong can out cards like Winda and Kaliga and force negates going second. And the fact that when you break Virtual World's board, but you don't take the Qinglong or the Chuchi off, it means it could start its turn every single turn by dismantling a threat and then popping like a Floodgate or a back row. It doesn't lose to Mystic Mine. It doesn't lose to Floodgates. It can play any Floodgates it wants to. It's rather annoying. It's a very, very good deck. It has good follow-up. Its follow-ups sometimes work better than Drytron's follow-ups, because with Drytron, sometimes you're on like the not top deck mode, but the I only have one card to tribute mode. So you tribute it for Drytron, your opponent stops it, and not all the Drytrons can activate because there's nothing that they can tribute for cost. But with Virtual Worlds, like, you have your in-phase GG ad, your Ptolemy M7 ad, you have the Shinshin engrave and the Qinglong engrave, so they can Ash Lulu that you added off of M7 or GG, and then you can just activate Lao Lao that you added off M7, and if they stop that, you can Qinglong, and you can still summon Shinshin. So it, like, Drytron might have more kill pressure on its follow-up, but Virtual Worlds have like separate follow-ups that each have to be addressed, whereas Drytron's follow-ups can be stopped by like a single Ash. Like, if you're on top deck mode and you top deck a Cyber Emergency or a name and you attribute it for Alpha and your opponent's Ashes, you have all these follow-ups in your grave, but you can't use them. But like, Virtual Worlds follow-ups work better, and I feel more comfortable with Virtual Worlds follow-ups. With Drytrons, it's scarier, but Virtual Worlds is more balanced and stable. So it's a really good deck. Doesn't really care about the Bear Statue. It has the best Flunder matchup out of all meta decks. I mean, Shifter kind of keeps everything in check. And I mean everything. Like, there's no tier 1 decks that are not afraid of Shifter. Dragon Link can at least end on Seal. So Shifter's not enough to say Virtual World has a bad Flunder matchup. I feel like Engine versus Engine, Virtual World beats it every time. That's a really solid tier 1 deck. Like, there's not a lot of bad I can say, except it really does lose to itself more often than not. But if the deck was as consistent as Drytron, I really wouldn't argue with someone if they said it's the best deck, because it has everything that it needs, except for just a little bit more starters. Mystic Mind's tier 1.5, without a doubt. I don't even want to talk about the deck. The card's broken, but as a deck, you're not even playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, and it's sad because most people that play this deck are less educated and not as good at the game, and they're not doing themselves a favor by playing this deck, because you're not going to get better at the game or grow as a player or learn anything. You're not going to learn about any interactions, you know. This is more for, like, I just want to win and I don't want to think, and that's fine. You know, whatever floats your boat. Tier 1.5 for Mystic Mind, for sure. But if you're trying to learn, and especially if you're like a stun player who just really doesn't have the good memory to play a deck that requires more thinking, you can at least start slower and play a deck that's easier and just kind of just grow as a player and get better. But whatever, play your Mystic Mind. Card's great, the deck sucks though. Dragon Maid is like pure Dragon Maid, I feel, is a really strong tier 1.5 deck. I personally, this is how high I regard Dragon Maid. Like, if you're talking about my build on Dragon Maid, it's right here. Like, all the unfair stuff PKs can do, including locking you out of your extra deck, guess what? My deck does it. I have access to Draco, so I can even lock you out of your main deck. And the fact that the boards don't lose to Dark Ruler, my Dragon Maid list plays through more hand traps than any combo deck I've ever played since my Pendulum Orcus days. That's the only deck that I've played that's ever played through more. And the fact that my deck's inboards just naturally have very few weaknesses and choke points. And if you guys see my Dragon Maid list in action, you see my inboard, people just try to break it and then they scoop. Like, it's just failed attempts every time. The resources, the follow-ups, it's just super powerful. You have a normal summon that beats Winda and Droll. You can out Floodgates, Mystic Mine. You just don't really have a lot of weaknesses. You don't care about the Barrier Statue. You can break a lot of different boards, including Virtual World inboards. It's crazy. But if we're not talking about the 3STACK Dragon Maid list, it's tier 1.5. And I would still, in my opinion, I would put it over Trap Eldritch and Trap Geist, because if you're playing Trap Dragon Maids, it's still better than both of these. And I have a very high opinion of Geist. I've played both. Dragon Maids actually has a better snowballing capability. They can do more with less, and they get out of the early game faster than these decks do. That's the other thing. With Trap decks, you need to get out the early game. So if we're talking about Trap Dragon Maids, it's still the best Trap deck, in my opinion. And that's just me. You can disagree. That's totally fine. But I've seen what this deck can do. The person that I think plays Trap Dragon Maid the best right now is definitely Milano. So he probably can agree with me. Like, Dragon Maid is just a very, very cracked deck. It's very powerful. It's actually broken in my opinion, but the people that don't play it just think it's another waifu deck. And the reality of it is, if it really is just another waifu deck, it is the queen of waifus. And that is a fact. I mean, Rei is bae, but let's come on. Like, I'm telling you, these Dragon Maids, bruh. Ain't nobody else doing them dishes, so. It is a very strong tier 1.5 deck. Pure. My list is tier 1, and you cannot change my mind. Trap Tricks, tier 3. I like this deck, though. I think it's one of the coolest trap decks. It has a lot of kill pressure. Its resources can snowball with just because of Sarah inherently resolving both her effects. Just gives you such good recovery. But its interruptions are more predicated to preventing a board from being set up and established, as opposed to other archetypes like, let's say, Geist or Eldritch or even Paleos. They have traps that can answer established boards from their archetype. But this deck's archetype-specific cards are inherently used to prevent boards from being established. They normally respond to summons. The only exception is Gravediggers, but even that, more often than not, going second doesn't do anything. So I like Trap Tricks, but I don't think that they're a good trap deck if you're considering the competition or the options you have. More often than not, if you're playing Trap Tricks, it's just because you're a fan of the deck and not because you really want to win. And at the end of the day, winning shouldn't be your priority. It's a card game, so you want to enjoy yourself, especially if you spend money to play the game. I feel like if I'm spending money and I'm not even happy or enjoying myself, that's just miserable. Like, spending $1,000 on a deck just to win, and then you can't even enjoy a game that you're playing when a game's supposed to be enjoyed. It's a way to use your free time and enjoy yourself. Like, so I would never hate on somebody for playing this deck, but I do feel personally there are way better options. These decks can play better floodgates and defensive traps, where Trap Tricks can play maybe goes in, but then they lose a lot of kill pressure, and they also just need the engine itself. I feel like because you kind of have to play Parallel Exceed and Shade Brigandine if you want the deck to make anything comparable turn 1 besides set 4 pass with the Sarah, you know, the deck loses a lot of depth. So if I was playing Trap Tricks, it'd be really hard to not play those cards. But at the same time, if you want to be able to excel like Trap Eldritch, you would want to play more high-impact traps that can do stuff to your opponent. So that's another issue with Trap Tricks. Agents is a tier 2 deck. It's actually tier 1.5. It's close to being tier 1.5. It's actually on the rise. Agents is a deck you guys want to look out for. Right now, as things stand from my testing, this is how I feel. It's the strongest tier 2 deck so far out of all the ones I went over. This deck's capabilities, its potential is so untapped, and just for it to do what it does already and to still not even be solved, it's just ridiculous. The disruptions it plays through, the inboards, the consistency, it's such a good deck. It's such a good deck. The agents are cray-cray. Main deck firepower, cards like Christia, Hyperion and his counterpart, and that is a really good thing to know because, you know, Scythe is so popular with Enforcer being a card. The agent deck's inboard can be atrocious, like 2 or 3 interruptions set up with Archlord Christia and Divine Punishment, no Dark Ruler, droplets for a trap. You still have to play through the counter trap regardless, and Christia saying no to almost every form of interaction. No Kaiju, no Lava Golem, no Super Poly, no Dark Ruler, no droplet. You literally just have to play through the board. It's such a good board. And there were follow-ups there. Parshath is such a busted card. Like, their Link 2 doesn't even make sense. A lot of these cards are just way too broken to be real. The fact that Diviner actually gets to use both of its effects in this deck and Heralds is bonkers. The one-card combos in this deck are just lit. And even the hand traps it struggles with, just like the Drytrons, it can play and search Herald of the Orange Light. So inherently, it's even better at playing through hand traps and going second and playing against established boards. This deck is actually cracked, you guys. Its inboard beats everything, even Flunders, because even though they might not special summon, they can't play through 3 interruptions. I'm sorry, it just really just can't with just pure engine. Like if the board goes uncontested, meaning you hand trapped it and it failed, because there's points where you can hand trap this deck and it'll play through it as if it never happened, and that I just feel like that in itself is just broken. The Agents deck is crazy. I can't wait to get my hands on these cards in real life. This is gonna be one of my main decks. I'm talking about this right here. I'm gonna play this as often as I play Dragon Maids. This is crazy. This deck is absolutely the stones. Tier 2, very close to tier 1.5. Burning Abyss, another high tier 2 deck. I'm gonna put BA right where B Troopers and Earth Machine is. The thing with BA that could give it the cake over them is that BA is really hard to hand trap. In fact, a lot of times you just really can't. The inherent nature of how the cards operate, you just really can't hand trap BA. And the times when you can, it's when Dante or Beatrice is resolving, or you're going to Verde. That means that you've already snowballed some advantage, and the deck's recursion is just top notch. It outgrinds so many decks out of their resources. I feel like you just really can't hand trap this deck. That's why I like my list. I play 20 hand traps on my list. You can even play Shifter in this deck. Dante's just as good as he's ever been. He's one of the most cracked cards. It makes any board that you make with Dante as a material under an XYZ like Zeus or Beatrice, makes it just 2 times harder to crack because the follow-up is there. Dragoon discarding Farfa, I think, is one of the most broken things ever, or discarding Calcab is just insane. The deck plays so well under pressure and interruptions. The hand trap build I like better than the trap build, but you know, I just feel like if you're going to play a trap variant, you should just be playing one of these 3. But BA is just really good, you guys. It's so much better. But I'm going to put it under Earth Machine and B Troopers because these do have like BA has a better toolbox. It has utility like through just easier. It just has easier utility. I feel like these decks' toolboxes can just go to farther outreaches than BA's, but BA's toolbox is easier to access because you can't really get hand trapped in the process of accessing it, and you chain block a lot of the time. And this deck makes really good Zeuses. It makes Zeuses kind of like how Zodiacs do. I play 3 Zeus in my list. Every time you make Zeus, you get consistent pressure, board wipes, and snowball advantage every time. Dante's just broke. This deck's just really good. Anybody that thinks it's not tier 2, play against a good Burning Abyss player and then come back after you've wiped your cheeks with an ice pack. This deck's cray. ABCs is going to be tier 3. The only thing that holds it back is consistency. If it's full power ABCs, this deck is still absolutely the stones. I feel personally it's right. I really would pick ABC over Salad, but the thing is, at least Salad's not going to lose to like low impact hand traps the way ABCs does. Salad plays through them better. But ABCs, like if Buster gets on the field, it's just crazy. Buster is just as broken as he's ever been. That card is like a sense of inevitability, the pressure that he puts onto you, being like, you have to kill me. You can't just break my board. You have to kill me. Buster follow-up is the best part about this deck. Getting to Buster is like the best thing that you can do with this deck. Union Hanger is the best starter. Unauthorized reactivation is kind of a second close, and that's the issue. This deck just lacks starters. You can play a lot of extenders, but you really need starters more than extenders, and that's where this deck's struggling right now. It's very inconsistent, and you need to play Prosperity. You have to, and it's gonna struggle a lot, you know. But it's a great deck. I feel like ABC is still a great deck. I feel like summoning Buster and equipping him with cards like A or B or even C, depending on the matchup, gives you a boss monster that's essentially, you know, masterpiece. Paleozoics, I think, is a solid tier 2 deck. I think they're one of the best trap decks. If you're playing in a control format where there's just a bunch of other trap decks, Paleo's the best deck of that format, I'm telling you right now. This deck's snowballing capabilities are better than all the other trap decks. Like, there's a reason why people play all those cards that mill Paleos and play Rise to Full Height, because even if you don't stop your opponent from playing, you start your turn off with a couple Paleos in the Frog Engine, you could just make Opabinia Toad and just go Opabinia Surge. They try and negate, they shouldn't do it. You can literally just attack, make Zeus, negate their stuff with Toad, and then after you wipe the board with Zeus, you make your own Toad. Once Toad sticks on the field for longer than a turn, you just kill them with Borosword. It's just broken. Rivalry goes in all the good floodgates, the toolbox from the Paleo traps. You can break boards going second. Going first, you literally just can auto-win against Flunders and Virtual Worlds. Phantom Knights can play through hand traps good, but they can not really play through a Canadia or a Dinomitius that's well-timed, funny enough. So it has really good meta matchups. And its trap cards do a better job at like keeping cards off the field and keeping your opponent at bay than the Eldritch Conquistador and even Silquidus in the Altergeist matchup. So that's why I really would want to put it up here. But The thing is, the consistency, to get this deck to be consistent, you have to play less cards that impact what your opponent does, and that's where it would hold it back. But if you played high impact trap cards like these, it could be considered higher. But the issue is getting access to its win condition, turning its engine, it would be slower and less consistent. So to make the deck consistent, you have to sacrifice power, but these decks are consistent and powerful at the same time. So Paleos are definitely going to be tier 2. I'm going to put them here because I have a high opinion of this deck. I think this deck's really good. Dogmatic Invoke Shaddolls. I'm going to put this over Phantom Knights. And you guys can disagree with me if you want. That's totally fine. I'm not going to hate on you. But I personally think Dogmatic Invoke Shaddolls is one of the best tier 1 decks in history. Shaddolls themselves, like Burning Abyss, are actually the most formidable and well-renowned decks. I would say like Mermills if they stayed as popular, but Shaddolls and BAs kind of just never really lost their fan base. Like, they've always been just ridiculously good decks. They're phenomenal. I mean, they're phenomenal. They're iconic. The thing that I like about the Shaddol archetype specifically, even without these cards, is you can adapt so well to every format and every situation with Shaddolls that they inherently are just able to thrive in so many different formats and environments. The utility that they have with Super Poly also allows them to cover more ground in matchups, being that they can out virtually every board. And even without Super Poly, the Shaddol archetype specifically, just having fusion spells and dolls allows you to break so many established boards. Shaddol Fusion is a 1 card out to so many boards right now, meta and rogue included. And the fact that if you're playing El Shaddol Fusion, there's times when you're playing against Drytron and you can catch them slipping when they're attempting to banish for cost off Eva. You can chain El Shaddol Fusion and summon Op Cologne, and even when they get their fairies, you can chain block Op and negate Herald, and then all you need to do at that point is chain block an Aerial, banish their Drytron follow-up. So Shaddolls can break a fully established Drytron board with pure engine, not even open Super Poly. People don't even think about that. But you know why people don't think about it? Because they don't know, because nobody plays El Shaddol Fusion. They just play this and 2 targets. I personally play the whole deck. I play the Invoke cards and the Dogmatic cards, but the best part about the deck for me is always the Shaddolls, because you get more technical play out of them. You get to thrive in more situations where these engines will fail you, Shaddolls will not fail you. And Shaddolls will also carry you over to your mid game and provide more protection and neutralize more threats for you. This deck naturally can out Enforcer, this deck is probably the best deck with outing Enforcer. It consistently does it every single time, whether it's through Aerial or if it's just through Alistair. So that's another cool thing. But the other thing is it naturally breaks boards just with pure engine, and it breaks good boards. It's not average boards. You can break Tri-Brigade boards, Phantom Knight boards. The fact that if you are on my build, whether it's just you open Super Poly or L, you want to play stuff like Starving Venom, because you can literally just Super Poly the Phantom Knight player. And you can literally use your draw phase priority, which means you can use your first action as Super Poly and just Super Poly away the Break Sword. The Rusty and the Enforcer, which cuts off them from being able to utilize Scythe now. The other thing too is El Shaddol Fusion can be chained. I used to chain El Shaddol Fusion to Retaliating Sea, to Artifact Scythe, to Anti-Spell, to Imperial Order, to Dimensional Barrier. El Shaddol Fusion is one of the best cards in the deck. It's the only one that got hit. Shaddol Fusion stayed at 3, El Shaddol went to 1. And people just don't play it. That is what baffles me. The deck itself has a great utility, a great toolbox, even without playing the actual Shaddolls. I feel like Invoke Dogmatica is easier to play and it's simpler. And if it's just Invoke Dogmatica, it's actually going to be even below Virtual Worlds. It's going to be right here. But if it's Invoke Dogmatica Shaddolls, the way I play it, I personally feel it's high tier 1. Because it breaks almost every board in the format, and Kaliga Winda just claps everything, including Flunders. Your follow-ups are incredible. You can snowball your resources. You maintain all your advantage. And economically speaking, a lot of your cards are just 1 card that gets you a +2 that carries over to the next turn. I think the deck's insane. It's adaptable to every format. It's super diverse. Your toolbox is incredible. You can just thrive. Like I said, you can thrive in so many scenarios. So I think Shaddol Dogmatic Invoked is a very incredible deck. I think it requires a lot more skill if you play the Shaddol cards. And I think I said that, but I'm going to say it one more time. If you're playing the extra Shaddol cards, it takes a lot more skill, and that's why I think a lot of people don't play them. Because A, they're scared to draw them because they just don't want to draw them because they feel like they're going to brick inherently more. And B, it simplifies the deck without them. So they're taking, quote, quote, the best parts of the Shaddolls, which is just the fusion monsters, and just using that. But actually, coming from a real Shaddol player, the best part about Shaddolls is the monsters and the spells and traps. The fusion monsters are cool, but the utility you get out of the main deck is arguably better in certain situations. So, yeah, I think this deck's incredible. It has the best Drytron matchup right now, going first or second. The only deck that debatably has the only deck that thrives that way is going to be Strikers and Dracos. But Strikers do better going second a lot of the times against Drytrons than going first. Speaking of Drytrons, I'm just going to cover Drytrons. I'm going to put Drytrons over Shaddolls. Shaddolls is a good hard counter to a lot of meta decks right now. Even against the Windberry statue, you have cards like Invoke Raijin, whether you super poly your Alistair to make Raijin hitting the Stormwinds, or you just conveniently had a wind. If you're playing against Lyralist, the Bird Up deck, they have winds and Grave to banish. If you're playing against Flunders, they don't have winds in your Grave to banish, but you can super poly it away. You can also use the Shaddol Wind monster to out the Barrier statue, so you can out everything. The thing you're going to struggle with is if Flunderies open Shifter. If they don't open Shifter, it's a lot easier to break their board and then cut them off of their engines just by slapping a Kaliga to simplify the game state for a turn and then snowball and OTK them next turn. It's an incredible deck. Drytron's the best deck right now for me. I'm not going to put any deck over it. I think this is just the best deck in the format. The ritual mechanic is just so broken and so powerful. Inherently, Drytrons have a toolbox of their own. Their follow-ups have kill potential. And that's what makes the deck scary. With Virtual Worlds, their follow-ups are incredible, but it doesn't always have kill potential. Neither do Phantom Knights. And not even Shaddolls at times. A lot of times, these decks just rinse, wash, and repeat. But with Drytrons, their follow-ups will actually kill you randomly out of nowhere. So when you break this deck's board, which is nearly impossible a lot of the times, you have to OTK them because their follow-ups are very, very strong. They will normally always have orange lights, even if you Dark Ruler their board. And right now, a big combo that's going around is searching Imperial Order through Beatrice and Mecha Phantom Beast Aurora Dawn. So this deck's inboard is even more insane because now you have Herald and you can't use Dark Ruler. And the only times you can use Droplet is if you're chaining it to Imperial Order's activation. So it makes it crazier. The only deck at that point that can out it would be Strikers with the Broken Hand and Shaddolls if they open specifically Squamata and Imperial and Super Poly, because you could Super Poly the Squamata and the Herald, and you can send Shaddol Dragon and send like a Shaddol Hedgehog and chain block your Dragoness Chainlink 1 to pop the order. So Shaddolls can do it, but they have to open specific. But the fact that they can even break that board is just it's a testament to how good the deck truly is. And Strikers can do it too. But yeah, Drytron's inboard is the best. Besides Dragoonides, I think Dragoonides inboard is just a lot more unfair. It cuts spell access off just like Drytron's, but it also cuts off extra deck access. And cutting off spells in extra deck, you don't even really need negates at that point. Your opponent's already on a turn skip permanently. And as my homeboy clearly just clarified, turn skips are a lot better than negates, and I actually stand by that. I believe him. But yeah, Drytron's pure engine can break a lot of boards. It plays through so many hand traps and disruptions, and the only really cards that can end its turn are Droll and Shifter, and it main decks Orange Lights and Called by the Grave. So it can literally beat the only cards that can stop its turn. So this is the most broken combo deck right now. It covers more ground than even Phantom Knights can. Like how Phantom Knights can, like this deck never really needed a normal summon like desperately. It helped, but this deck can play Brave like Phantom Knights, and it also can play the Artifact package with Enforcer. So even that unfair portion of Phantom Knights that makes it even better, Drytrons can do that just for fun. They don't even have to. Like, this deck's just in a league of its own right now. There's very few decks that can keep up. Another incredible tier 1 deck, in my opinion, is going to be Sky Striker. I'm going to give them the cake over Virtual World and Dragon Link. And I know it sounds crazy, but I have my good reasons. I think Strikers truly has no bad matchups. I think Strikers, like Shaddolls, adapts to every format and can thrive in any environment. Their toolbox makes up for where they lack in sheer power. The consistency outweighs the power a lot of the times. Their ability to just navigate through fully established boards, their resources, their economics are insane. The deck snowballs and out resources almost every deck it gets paired with. Its advantage is insane. Trading 1-for-1s with established boards is not a problem with this deck. This deck consistently beats Drytron as well. I mean, there's times when you're just in a Chainlink war where you're like, activate Afterburner or anything. More often than not, when they have Herald, they just negate everything you activate. And you're like Chain Widow, they're like Chain Negate. And they're like Chain, you're like Chain something else. And they're like Chain Negate, discard Eva. And you're like Chain Shark Cannon, target Eva. And if they don't have another negate, Eva gets banished, so you can't even resolve and you break their board. And if they do, like Striker's just so reactive. You have Droplets, Widow, Shark Cannons, Afterburners. You can play all kinds of things. Like, even without Droplets, Strikers can just out. Like, if Herald ends on Orange Light plus Eva, strikers can just do it really easily. Because the other thing is, while they're using all those Widows and that Shark Cannon and that Afterburner, if they have Ray, they can just normal Ray, go into Kagari, and just add it back. And it's just crazy. Like, and once they do all that and they activate Engage, like, that's the thing is, I played against strikers when I was playing Pure Herald, and they broke my board with just striker cards. And I had 5 fairies. It was like Engage, Widow. Yeah, I think it was like Afterburners, Widow, Engage, Kagari, add back, negate, race, summon back, link off. Then it was crazy. They did something, but they ended up activating Engage after they baited 5 fairies. Ray just plays through so much interruptions. The fact that Ray actually snowballs by herself, just making any Sky Striker link, the amount of disruptions you can play through alone, like Hayate sending Engage to go into Kagari will force an interruption if your opponent has it, because they want to deny Engage access. And then the fact that right after that, you can just go into Shizuku and still get another piece of advantage through those hand traps that they threw at you with 1 Ray. This deck's just absurd. Like I said, it's very adaptable. If you know the format very well too, you're going to thrive. And I'm only putting Striker this high because most of the people that play this deck are good players. And a good Striker player can beat anybody. And as much as I love Shaddolls, it can be very, very neck and neck. Shaddolls can lose to Strikers, but Shaddolls can also beat Strikers as well. These two have the best technical play in the game. They reward skill more than any other deck. And they have to work a little bit harder sometimes than other decks do. Shaddolls probably have to do a little bit less work because some matchups just auto-lose to Winda Kaliga, where strikers always have to work because the deck's not unfair at all. And a lot of the times, you have to stay on your toes, and you really have to plan. You have to make the proper reads, whether it's your opponent's body language or simply just counting the amount of interruptions that they've utilizes along with their hand. And in addition to that, strikers doesn't always have to end on a lot of interruptions. You just need to end on enough to make your opponent commit, because sometimes making your opponent commit allows this deck to go lethal faster. You need to use your opponent's cards in their grave and their field. Concerning cards like Dragoon, even if a good player holds their negate for Rose, you can still use cards like Widow and Shark Cannon to make access code or Ningirsu. So you can out Dragoon relatively easily if you have your engine online. So yeah, this deck's just really, really broken. I think Striker is one of the best decks right now. So the video's roughly 2 hours in. Sharks, I think Shark's a great tier 3 deck. I really actually would put it over ABCs and all the other decks. Personally, I think Sharks actually could be better than Salads. The reason being, Sharks has access to a really strong engine too. It's really hard to hand trap this deck because they only play good cards. So everything they activate normally is hand trap bait. They have really good extenders. Their engine's crazy. They put up negates for no reason. As they continue the combo, they have access to Dweller. Like Mermills, they can play the new Umi support. The new rank 4 water monster is really looking nice. They can also make the rank 5 as well, which is broken. Like, just attach a monster as material. It navigates established boards relatively well because, of a truth, it's really hard to stop this deck because it has no definitive choke point. It really doesn't. Because if you open well with Sharks, they play through so much more. It's not like Mad Mechs where they're playing more than they have any business to. It's like the truth of the matter is, whether you know how to hand trap the deck or not, it inherently is actually able to play through a lot more than it's given credit for. I think the Shark deck's really, really strong. And water decks, I think, are really good because the water support, in my opinion, is better than the wind support. Speaking of, Speedroids are going to be the kings of Tier 3 right now. I think Speedroids could be Tier 2. The only thing that holds them back is that they can't really play as many non-engine cards. Sharks can play like a lot of hand traps, but Speedroids, it's like Wombo Combo, kind of. Like, in Wombo Combo, when I say that, that just means like your engine requires too much space, so you don't have enough like for flexibility. But Speedroids grind well, their follow-ups are crazy, their inboards are really nice, and they play through hand traps extremely well with their new support. I think it's just even better than it's ever been. And I also think that it excels in mid-range matchups, because I feel like it's a combo deck that naturally just plays mid-range. You really don't have to overextend too much with this deck. It's really hard to hand trap because there's so many good cards, there's so much Ash Bait, and if you hold your hand trap for Rubber Band, the way the deck's designed now, it actually can push past that choke point. And initially, it wasn't able to do that consistently enough. So, my bad. I was taking a drink. Yeah, I think Speedroids are just in a really good spot. This deck, I feel like, could be on the rise as a really popular Tier 2 deck. But until people figure out how to build the deck and be able... Because the thing is, the reason why the deck needs hand traps is not because it needs to be able to break boards going second. Because the fact of the matter is, unless you're playing against Wombo Combo, you can break mid-range boards. Like, if you play against Print Kids, you can actually bait their double Raigeki. It's crazy. You're playing against, like Evil Twins, other decks that set up good boards that just have interruptions and not like a proactive, you cannot activate this, you cannot play Yu-Gi-Oh kind of card. They can break those boards. There's a lot of decks like that can do it. Speedroids can do it, Water can do it, like Bee Trooper, Earth Machine. It's not that this deck does stuff that they can't already do, but I'm just pointing out that it can. And I'm saying that only to say it doesn't need hand traps for that reason. I feel like it needs hand traps because its inboards aren't always enough. Like, you can get 2-3 solid interruptions, but you normally can never go past 3. And I feel like just having a hand trap or 2 to have on top of your inboard just makes it that much better, especially to play defensively, because naturally Dark Ruler No More is just going to be good against every combo deck, and any combo deck that can play hand traps will have an advantage because those unknown cards are going to make a huge deal when your opponent doesn't play around them. Infernoble, I think, is going to be low tier 3. Well, not low, like mid tier 3. I'm going to still put it over everything that's not in Speedroids. This is the thing with Infernobles. I feel like this deck just doesn't play through interruptions as good anymore. And its choke point is so obvious that most people will just literally hold their hand trap for a Rorodon, and a lot of times that ends the turn. You have Connector, but the truth of the matter is any Warrior deck can play that, and that's why I'm going to grab Gokis, and I feel like Gokis, if you're playing pure Gokis, Gokis is tier 2. So here's Gokis. I'm going to put them next to... I'm going to put Gokis next to Mermels. I think Gokis is a really good deck. So I can talk about both these at the same time. If you're playing the Goki variant that a lot of people play, your inboard's just like Phantom Knights. And at that point, you might as well play Phantom Knights because you're doing yourself a disservice by trying to mimic what this deck does when it can do it better. But if you're playing pure Gokis, your inboards involve Towers-esque cards that can't be outed by Dark Ruler or Droplets or any anti-combo cards. And you can play all the cards that make Infernoble good inside of Goki. That's the other thing. You can do hand loop combos. You can do virtually almost anything with Isolde. Isolde can FTK, she can hand loop, she can set up multiple negates, or she can put up multiple towers. Goki's has a better engine because it plays through hand traps better. It has less choke points, and it navigates through established boards better. It can play Gearfried, you can outwinda. I think Goki's is just better. I think Infernobles look cooler, and because they're newer, a lot more people gravitate towards it. But at the end of the day, in my opinion, I always think Goki's going to be the better Warrior deck of the two. I think Goki just does more with less, plays through more, going second and going first. It has the option to do what Infernobles does, but has alternate win conditions, which means its inboards can be different based on the matchup. Like, trap decks can't really beat a Towers deck, you know what I mean? But then let's say you're playing against like Dragon Link, and you don't have something to stop Borosword, maybe you do want to set up the Fog Blades and Dragoons in Appaloosa. But yeah, I think these decks are pretty cool, but I would say Goki's is definitely better. Tri Brigade. If we're talking about pure Tri Brigade, I feel like it's low tier 1. I would put pure Tri Brigade as the lowest tier 1 deck, period. I think that this is the worst tier deck I've ever seen, tier 1 deck I've ever seen. It's so average. And that's how I feel about another few decks that you guys are going to see that might make you mad. But in my opinion, pure Tri Brigade just lacks so much. When you have to play 15 hand traps and you don't have a choice, I feel like that's a problem. Like Salads, that's a problem. You have to play that many hand traps. Like, these decks, Phantom Knights break boards with Engine. Dragon Link, Virtual World, Strikers, Shadows, Drytrons break boards with Engine. Tri Brigade's the only tier 1 deck that can. It's the only tier 1 deck that relies on that cripple, or that crutch, for example, to carry it. Its hand traps are the carry. Appaloosa Revo is like the dumbest board I've ever seen. It's a joke. Like, I call this deck Bi Brigade. I feel like it's a joke. If we're talking about pure Tri, it's the weakest tier 1 deck I've ever seen, and nobody's going to change my mind. Because the people that play Tri Brigade are the same ones that play Guru. They just don't want to think. They just want to resolve Revo, and the deck's so simple and easy to play, that's what makes it popular, honestly. Personally, I just don't have a high opinion of it, but you can disagree if you want. But if we're talking about Bird Up, this is where Bird Up would be, in my opinion. I think the Lyralist cards make up for everything that would make Tri Brigade bad. Like, all the weaknesses that it has are solved just by splashing this. So even though you lose your little hand traps that you would use to make your deck able to simplify game states, because Tri Brigades can't break boards, so they have to prevent them from happening. Because the reality is, Rescue Cat, Karaz is all you've got, and if those two get stopped, and you can get hand trapped on your normal and not even have Keras. That's why people play Crossout Designator. And this is my opinion on Crossout Designator. If you have to play it in your deck, then your deck's just not good enough. Not saying your deck's bad, but it's not good enough. Because that means you can't even play through 2 hand traps if you're playing Crossout. But Bird Up is insane. Bird Up plays through so much, it doesn't make sense. It has great recovery, great follow-up, doesn't care about the Bear Statue, can break boards with pure engine. Every deck right here, except for Shadal's, has a win condition in time. Striker, Bird Up, PKs, Herald, Dragon Link, Virtual World, all of them have a win condition in time except for Shadal's. So this deck has a win condition in time. It can navigate through fully established boards. It's so impressively, and I feel like it's more refreshing too to see Tri-Brigade to be able to do stuff that we haven't seen it do in a while. I think this deck is just crazy. Its inboards are the most susceptible to Dark Roller of all the Tier 1 decks without utilizing Revolt anymore. Because if you utilize Revolt, you have to cut off a lot of your inboard. You know, you need to leave at least 3 zones. If you're summoning a properly summoned Link 2 and 2 other tries, you need at least 3 zones. That means you're summoning off some work, and whatever you ended on is all you get plus Revolt. So you lose less to Dark Ruler to get a Banish. But the inboards normally are Avion, Ensembled Rollin, double Dragon Lords. And honestly, a lot of the times, that's just enough. Like, the bounces alone plus the negate and Utopic Future, I forgot to mention, is just enough. But when you get this deck's inboard loses to Dark Ruler, like, this deck plays around Dark Ruler. Like, you're going to get Scythe locked, and then you have Fog Blades anyways if you didn't. This deck's going to have Orange Lights. This deck can set up double Winda Kaliga through Dark Ruler. And you also have Punishment and Flare de Lis. This deck's going to have Tidying minimum and hand traps, whatever you summon off Seal. This deck's minimum going to have Chuchi hand traps. This deck just can't get Dark Rulered. This is like, if you get Dark Rulered with this deck, and I'm not saying that that's like the drawback, like that's the deal breaker. But I'm just saying like this deck's inboard, even though it looks scarier than other decks' inboards, it has more weaknesses and can be cracked easier than the inboards these decks make. The thing is, PK's inboard might not look as scary as Tries, but the reality of it is, PK's inboard is better. It's a stronger deck. It plays better engines. Arguably, the Brave engine and the Phantom Knight mixed with the Phantom Knights is just incredible. I think that Phantom Knights are in a league above Tri-Brigade Bird Up, even though some people might not agree. That they just think like the chicken deck is better. And that's fine, because these are very neck and neck and it's very close. Some people feel like Shadal's is the worst tier 1 deck, and that's fine too. But I do think Phantom Knights is better. I think its inboard's better. I think it plays through hand traps even better than this deck can. It plays through Droll and Lockbird better than this deck can. It plays through Nibiru and Appaloosa better than this deck can. Phantom Knights does a lot of things better than this deck, even the Bird Up variant. And its inboards just don't lose to the same blowout cards that this deck's inboards do. And I mean, no matter what, if you're dropletting any of these tier 1 decks, you're normally dropletting for at least 2 or 3. So droplets, even though it will solve some of your problems, you still got to break the board after. But I think this deck's incredible. I think Harpy's Featherstorm and Dark Samorg and Barrier Statue and Avion just give this deck a whole nother level. Like, the fact that it just utilizes incredibly powerful Wing Beast support on top of being able to utilize Beast and Beast Warrior support if it needed to, it's definitely got an adaptability. It's really, really good. Guru, I think this deck's trash. I think Guru's absolutely trash. Honestly, this deck's terrible. If you don't play Shifter and you don't play Dragoon, the deck's just butt cheeks. I think Guru's terrible. I would put it over these, though. I wouldn't even put it over Octobotics. Well, I would say it's doing better than these decks, but my opinion of it is this is where it would be. You know what? I wouldn't give it the cake over Trap Tricks. Madolche's very good tier 2 deck. This deck is way, way up there. Madolche's is actually right here with Bee Troopers and Earth Machines. All 3 of these decks have a lot of similarities. Like, a lot of them. They really do. Snowballing factor, sticky boards, hard to kill, resource just blowing, like, dude, like, the amount of advantage you get in Madolche's is ridiculous. It doesn't have unfair boards, and it doesn't really use unfair cards, and that's what makes it even better, is the fact that it can do what it does without using a true win condition and still beating you. Because naturally, its inboard is just really, really hard to break. It recycles hand traps like no other deck can do. It can play Shifter and loop it. And there's a few decks like, you know, for example, Flunders can do that. It's not the only deck, but it's just really, it's unique. Madolche's is really strong. It doesn't play through hand traps as good as other decks, but the thing is, it's still able to play through at least 2. More often than not, it can play through 2. And I feel like 2 is just a good number, because realistically speaking, everybody doesn't open 3 hand traps. And you shouldn't be saying that a deck's not good because it can't play through 3, because just like I said, realistically speaking, people don't open 3 hand traps all the time. So Madolches is a really good deck. It's incredible going second. It's incredible going first. I feel like playing stuff like either the Trap Tricks engine or Floodgates or Goes In or just more hand traps is going to help, because your inboard needs something extra on top of it to carry over to your next turn. But yeah, the deck's just really, really hard to kill. It's very, very consistent. It can be very explosive. You can play Orange Light, which allows it to beat even more high impact hand traps. I think Madolches is very, very strong. It plays through just enough to be good. It's consistent enough to where it has... I mean, it pretty much has like 9 one-card combos, excluding Prosperity and Small World accessing even more. And the fact that it navigates so well through specific boards, I think this deck is really, really good. It's very good. Madolches is actually crazy, you guys. It's very crazy. It's been doing really well. We've talked about all these decks. Oh yeah, Sword Soul. So this is probably going to break your heart, but Sword Soul is a tier 1.5 deck in my opinion. Just like Try, I feel like the decks are very average. Not that they're bad. They're good. They have what you need to be a tier 1 deck. But in no way, shape, or form are the decks broken. Try Bird is broken. This deck's broken. Sword Soul is not broken. There's nothing broken about it except summoning Protoss, calling an attribute, and then summoning Chow Fein. But the thing is, just because the deck can do broken things doesn't mean the deck itself is broken. Sword Soul is not that consistent. It doesn't play through hand traps the way a tier 1 deck is supposed to. If you're going to call it tier 1, it has to perform like a tier 1 deck. And just because you say, oh, it came out and is doing this, that, and the third, the reality of it is the only really good matchup it would have going first would be Drytron inherently. But the issue is, if you play the Tinny cards and you have to rely on Ashina, your inboards have a weakness that they shouldn't have. You're going to lose even harder to Dark Ruler in Lightning Storm and evenly matched, things of that nature. Your boards are the easiest to break out of all the tier 1 decks. If this was tier 1, this deck's board would be the easiest to break, and that doesn't make sense. That's a joke. The other thing is your performance. Navigating through established boards, it can be decent, and you might be able to force a couple interactions. Like, the reality of it is, what makes the deck so good going second is that a lot of people don't want it to make Chi Xiao, because the reality of it is, if it makes Chi Xiao and can keep playing, Chi Xiao can be the negate for your negate. So every starter like Mo Yi or Tai or Long Young will be a bait, or Ecclesia will be a bait for negates. But you have to open Insane all the time to be able to do that. And if you're utilizing the Tinny cards, you're inherently going to make a board that has no spell or trap negations, and the only monster negation you'll get actually targets. So I just don't like Sword Souls as like a tier 1 deck. I just don't think it's good. I also just really don't like the deck. The way people talk about it makes me not like it. If people weren't overhyping it, I would just be like, you know, it's just another good deck. But because it's so average and people feel like it's so crazy, it makes me not even want to play it, because I just feel like these guys are crackheads. Like, I'm just keeping it real. Like, the way they hyped up Searching Revolt, I just feel like these people are crackheads. I like worm monsters, and I think this archetype is very cool and unique. I haven't seen a deck synchro summon in this way. I think Sudden Shift is incredible against monkey decks. Prank Kids setting up Rip Roaring Rooster can blow up 5 back rows. Sudden Shift can hit 2. I mean, you've got decks that can kill monkey decks, for sure, for sure. Eldritch is the only monkey deck. These, at least, you gotta think, but I just think the deck's missing a lot. I don't think Sword Soul is that great. Tier 1.5, but low tier 1.5. Sun Avalon is tier 2. I don't have a lot to say because I haven't played the deck, but just from what I've seen, I'm comfortable with putting it above Evil Twins minimum. I like the combo. The inboard's really good. This deck can actually extra link off 1 card. It sets up multiple interruptions. It's very consistent. There's a lot of normal support you can use to access this card. It has a decent amount of extenders and can play quite a few hand traps. This is all I know. I don't really know how well it is in certain matchups, because the inboard looks generically good, but it's not going to overperform in any matchup. I'm comfortable with putting it here. Pendulums are going to be high tier 2, in my opinion. You know, you can disagree. That's totally fine. But I'm going to put Pendulums here. I'm also going to put Megaliths here. And I'm going to put Magic Keys here. So this is like, right now, these are like dominating tier 2. These are the best tier 2 decks. I think these decks have a lot to offer. There's a lot of, let me check my timer here. There's a lot of unexplored avenues concerning these 2 archetypes. Pendulums, in its nature, I think Pendulums is always going to be a great deck. Inherently right now, the issue with Pendulums is why they've been in a rough spot is not only because they lost a lot of cards that made them incredible, which means they're not incredible, they're still great. It's just a lot of Pendulum decks lack the ability to main deck certain staple cards that other decks need to thrive. But where Pendulums make up is that they can break a lot of fair boards. Like, there's a lot of boards that Pendulums can break that other decks literally just can't do. And Pendulums can do it with almost any hand that they draw. That's the thing. The Pendulum summoning mechanic is still just as broken as it's ever been. And the way I feel, I think Pendulum Magicians are in the best position as far as being a Pendulum deck that doesn't have the flexibility to play hand traps, but also doesn't necessarily need it. Purple Poison allows you to out pretty much any negation that's not Dragoon, including Herald of Ultimateness or Perfection. Purple Poison in itself, by its nature, is just such a broken card. It makes Pendulum Magician so cracked going second. That's why I love playing 3 purple. It's so good. Every Pendulum deck's consistent. They always have really good starters. Their power plays are incredible. More often than not, certain lists play into Droll more, but right now, Pendulum Magicians isn't really going to play into Droll as much, and there's not a lot of hand traps that work against Pendulums. That's the other thing. They're like Burning Abyss. They're really hard to hand trap. Like Ghost Spells and Skullmeisters, they just don't work. Imperm and Veilers barely do anything. You might get lucky in Ash if something has a discard for cost, and Pendulums naturally are able to play through Nibiru. So the hand traps is not a problem. That's why they're so high on the tier 2 list, because they play through a lot more than they're given credit for. Where they're really lacking right now is just, like I said, the inability to play certain defensive cards that are necessary in neutralizing certain boards. You make up for that in side decking, but the problem is now, like, when you have to play out of your side deck just to win certain matchups, it doesn't feel good because that's something that your archetype doesn't have to offer in game 1, you know? I think Zephrys, Pendulum Magicians, and Endymion are the best Pendulum variants out right now. Doremi Chart is really cool, and I like them a lot too, but I think that Zephrys, Pendulum Magicians, and Endymions can do more with less. They're better going first and going second. These decks set up the most impressive inboards you'll see more often than not. Really hard to break. Most of them have counters to Dark Ruler, and a lot of them can lock you out. Like, Zephrys have their own separate win conditions. Pin Mags can Scythe lock you. They can still play Enforcer. Endymions can literally just play with their main deck. They don't even need they don't care about Scythe. You can just set up Jackal Kings and Endymions and Master Cerberuses and freaking Magisters and Reflections. The deck's just really, really good. Endymion's going to struggle more with hand traps than any other Pendulum deck, but Pendulums are in a better spot people give them credit for. But I am just going to say it is true. They are in a pretty tough spot right now. Before I talk about Magic-E and Megalith, I want to see what I haven't covered. Despias. I haven't covered Despias and Cyber Dragons and Musketeers. Okay. Alright, got it. So I'm going to save these two for last. Or no, I'm going to cover them. So the reason why I feel like these are the most broken tier 2 decks right now is... Okay, so for one, not only is... Remember how I told you it's not just about how broken the deck is. I mean, how broken the things that the deck is able to do. It's how consistently it can do it and how often it can do it playing under turbulence and pressure. Well, these decks can do more unfair things than even Drytrons a lot of the times. It's baffling. Drytrons can, but they have to build their deck totally different from the standard, and most people just don't have the balls to do that. So, Megaliths have an even more unfair inboard than Herald Imperial Order. It's actually insane what they're able to do. They have a lingering turn skip that they can do through multiple hand traps. They have like the best Ooga Booga trap matchup because the nature of summoning Baethor when people set and pass just allows you to kill traps before they can activate it, which is insane. And you can loot Baethor from your grave every turn. Once you get the Field Spell and Emergence up, this deck can out-resource a lot of decks. It has an incredible grind game. The same with Magic Keys. Magic Keys have an incredible grind game. I like splashing these both together. These make the most broken ritual deck that is not Drytron, and it's cheaper than Drytron. It's like the budget Drytron. Like, that's why I have them together, because I think Magic-E Megalith is just a perfect combination to be played together. These two solve a lot of each other's problems, and inherently, this right here, if this was, let's say if nobody knew what these cards did and never seen them before, and they saw it, they would think this was the best combo deck of the format. Like, it's so gross. It's insane. Like, remember how I talked about agents? These decks combined are just I almost want to say the R word. Like, it's just so ridiculous. Like, the amount of interruptions they can play through. Like, they have, I mean, when you just consider their turn 1 board and how many hand traps they can play through, they have no bad matchup when you think about that. Going second, they might struggle against the barrier statue at times. Everybody's going to struggle against the Drytron board, but they can also deal with Window on their first summon. They can play without their extra deck, which inherently helps you to play through Scythe. They play through Fog Blades really well as well, because once you get Scythe, all you have to worry about is Fog Blades, and that's the other thing, is they have a really good PK matchup for that reason. They have an incredible Sword Soul matchup, absolutely phenomenal. I mean, this deck can literally just stomp all over anything Sword Souls can spit out. I don't care if it's Dragite, Flare, Shift, and Chi-Shao. That's how broken Megalith and Magic-E are together. And separately, they're just that disgusting. I mean, these decks, I had to hype them up. I really was going to save them for last, because I think these are the most broken Tier 2 decks on this list. You guys probably wouldn't know if you don't play them. But the other thing, too, is Megalith's had a little bit of, hype. You know, they've had like a solid run. The moment people discovered it and tested it out, it immediately topped a YCS. And that format was just a crazy time, like, for Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, it just didn't even make sense. Like, Megalith was able to thrive, and people started playing it after that, because you know how people are. They say a deck's bad till somebody tops, and then they say, why aren't you playing it? And it's like, yesterday you were just saying it's bad. And then they're telling you, why aren't you playing this deck? You know how people are, but Megaliths is one of the most disgusting ritual decks I've ever seen. You guys, if you have not played Megaliths, there's no excuse. It's not even expensive. It's literally budget Drytron. Magic-E's just are steroids for this deck, and Megalith is steroids for Magic-E. I can't stress it enough. You guys just have to playtest these decks. They're just super insane. Like, it's not just because they're broken, because the reality of it is, Mermails, I have such a high opinion of, like, the water deck. I think it's broken too, but these decks can do even more, like, ridiculously unfair stuff. Like, Megaliths can literally search a trap that says, if I ritual summon on your turn, you can't activate spells and traps. And then I summon Chaos Max, lock you out of monster effects, lingering effect. And then you're like, oh, I just set pass. And I'm like, Bathor, pop your back rows, you're dead next turn. That's it. It's literally just an FTK. And you can actually FTK. Like, it's the fact that you can do virtually whatever you want. It's like you're playing Gokis from back in the day. It's ridiculous. Hand loop combos. I mean, there's just so much that you can do that sometimes people just go for the standard 4/5 negate board, which literally just negates your whole hand anyways. But the fact that you can turn skip, FTK, it's ridiculous. And you can actually turn skip. I can't even. Let me shut up. Next up, Cyber Dragons. Cyber Dragons are definitely tier 2. For me, I have a lot of respect for Cyber Dragons. I would never do that to them. I would personally put Cyber Dragons right in between Dinosaurs and Paleozoics. I think these two are some of the best going second decks that you can play that are not meta. Cyber Dragons inherently have better matchups than other decks because of their contact fusing mechanic. Mega Fleet kills Appaloosa. Any problematic extra zone, any problematic monsters in the extra monster zone, you naturally can deal extremely well with Zeus, Drytron monsters, their ritual monster. You know, you're going to have good matchups for that simple fact alone. Like, Cyber Dragons will always be the king of machines, so any machine deck they play against, they naturally just have, you know, free board wipes, essentially. Their inboards going first are incredible. They can kill you out of nowhere going second like Dinosaurs, which makes them scary. They play through hand traps extremely well, and the deck just always beats Nibiru, so it feels really good. I think this deck is incredible. It has a lot of potential, whether it's a trap deck, a combo deck, in between, an OTK deck using the best that Cyber Darks have to offer, or just a pure Cyber Dragon deck. Dragoon Infinity Overflow hand traps is just too nice. A lot of the times, your board doesn't have to look overly, like you don't have to have an over-the-top board. Like, I think the Birdo board, even though it's good, it's just overdone. You know, it's just way too much going on. Like, decks that can just put up a simple board that's effective, and they can just do it with less cards, and don't require more resources from extra deck, means their recovery is going to be better, because there's more that they can do next on their follow-up. So, I feel like Cyber Dragons is really, really strong. Inherently, the new support did give it a little bit more as far as starters go, and extension, because just playing like that one realm and, you know, an extra target just allows core to do more by itself. It just turns core into more of a one-card combo than it already was. I think Cyber Dragons are incredible. You just really can't go wrong with this deck. It's always going to be a great choice. Magical Muskets is like the poor man's Sky Strikers. I truly have a high opinion of this deck, and I personally would say as far as matchups, it doesn't really have any bad matchups. Muskets can break pretty much every board. The thing is, their recovery is not like Striker. If they had the recovery of like Ray, Magical Musketeers could be right where Strikers is too, because they're very adaptive to different formats. They have a toolbox of their own, and their repertoire is good in certain matchups but bad in others. So there's a lot you can do in the terms of like adapting the formats. And then when you build the deck, it doesn't care about a lot of hand traps. The thing too with it is inherently playing through negations is easier because of max. So it's like the striker thing where you play a lot of striker cards and then summon Ray and just get some good value out of it. Well, like you summon a musket, you trade with Appaloosas, and you negate Revolt with Last Stand. You cross domination one of their cards, and then you link summon for max and just get your advantage back that you lost. Including when you're playing against like Perfection, if you cross dom, you know, you can Last Stand their Imperial Order, you cross dom, you know, you chain Desperado, you pop the activation's negated, you know, and you just link off in the max. They chain Herald, you chain Eagle Booster because that's the spice I play. He resolves, you get the advantage back that you lost, and you activate fresh copies of cards that he just negated, and you kill Herald, and then you can just Dancing Needles the Drytrons in their grave. So muskets can have a really good Drytron matchup. They don't care about a lot of what Jadal, Dogmatica, Invoke do. They can easily out Kaliga and Winda with their engine. So they're really good going second against Jadals. Like the counter trap really helps with stopping cards like Punishment on their normal summon. They can trade with Chuchi to make sure that they can actually break every meta board. That's what makes Magical Muskets so good. Going first, they're not as great in my opinion, but when it comes to going second, they can dominate and excel, kind of like Dracos and Strikers. Like Draco, Striker, and Muskets are really up there in the terms of having no bad matchups and being able to virtually break every board. Resolving Max helps you to clear cards that can't be targeted either. So Muskets are so much better, you know. I feel that they're not unfair at all. They're just like, that's why I call them poor man strikers. It's the best way to reference them. Nothing they do is unfair, but they can keep the advantage that they start with. They have a snowballing factor, and they can make sure that they always have interruptions every turn. So if you can play through them one turn but can't play through them next, then you're not going to play through them the turn after. So that's where, like, even though they don't have the kill pressure other decks have and can't OTK randomly, they make up for that. Just being able to constantly drain the opponent of the resources by just consistently just committing to one-for-one interactions that they can immediately recover from because of Max. So, and cards like Caspar and Doc. So I'm having trouble putting them in their place because I think, like, if just as a going second deck, it's up there with like Cyber Dragons and Dinos, you know. And they can play a lot of hand traps. Like, I have a list right now that can play 18 hand traps, including Dimensional Shifter. But the thing is, when you put people on a turn skip with muskets, it's a little bit harder to kill people in the follow-up. Especially when they don't commit, so Utopia the Double can't even help you. But you can just play all those cards. I'm just having trouble putting them in their place. Paleo's really strong, but like in Paleo's, like, just have, I feel like their engine can snowball into a better interruptions. Muskets just get it right off the bat. You know, they don't really need to set up, they don't need to stall for a turn or anything like that. But Paleo's a trap deck, and that's the thing. That's just kind of how trap decks inherently play. I personally, I feel like I'm going to give Muskets this spot right here, right next to Cyber Dragons. They're really good. They're really, really good. These are all the tier 3 decks. Pure Amazements is definitely going to be down here under Guru. Deck lacks a lot. I mean, it's a trap toolbox, and I like that, you know, you can have utility in different situations where you can get out of them and other decks can't, but you just can't really play Pure Amazement. You're doing yourself a disservice. You need to splash it with something else, and that's how I feel about it. As a deck, it's just not it, you know. It might as well be an engine, and at that point, it's like a tier 3 engine, because honestly, a lot of trap decks that use Amazement, they can already play trap cards that do what the Amazement trap cards do, because they mimic cards like Crackdown and Book of Moon and cards like Lost Wind, and you can just play those cards, you know. But I get it because it's a cool deck, and, you know, it has different names and the artwork, and Arlecchino is kind of nice, but I don't know. Unless your trap deck just doesn't have offensive pressure that he can provide, it just doesn't really do enough for me, in my opinion. Despia's is actually crazy, though. Despia's is going to be over here. As a pure deck, Despia's should be right above Actually, yeah, I would personally put Despia's over Agnisters. You guys can disagree. It's my tier list, but you guys can definitely disagree. Pure Despia's is this good, but if we're talking about this variant of Despia, Yeah, it's right here where Shadow Dynamic invoked is, because it's everything that this deck has to offer with the Despia cards. It's really hard to accomplish this feat by playing a 40 card deck and getting the best that you can get out of your engines in your extra deck. But if you can pull it off, the amount of disruptions, it's like this would truly just be, it's really hard. Like, it's really hard to not like get overly excited, but it's just, Despia is crazy. Like, for one, I always enjoy when a deck can float, grind, recover, have follow-ups, break boards as good as it makes boards. Playing Despia feels like playing Shadows. Fusion spells are just so nice in this deck. Just fusion spells and drawing engine, you just break boards naturally. And because of how fusion decks work, people always negate fusion spells. That's what makes fusion decks so good going second, because if they have a negate, they use it on the fusion spell, because they just, 10 times out of 10, people regret letting a fusion spell resolve, because fusion monsters normally have something crazy in their decks. Despias are just insane. Dramateurs is ridiculous. Their toolbox and recovery is phenomenal. As a going second deck, Pure Despia is pretty viable in certain matchups like Dragon League, Virtual World, Shadows, Drytrons, Altergeist, Eldritch. You know, it's really, really strong. Like, as an engine, it's a tier 1 engine also. And with the new support, it has like a pseudo FTK win condition. It makes Albaz so much better. And honestly, the Despia cards belong with the Dogmatica cards. It just suits him so well. You get to utilize cards like Titaniclad and Sprint to the fullest of their advantage, to the fullest of their potential. I just feel like Despia's is one of those decks that it's not that it's not popular enough. It's just that a lot of people just don't know what they're doing with it yet. They just don't know how to build it right. Because there's too many ways to build it, and that's where it becomes like an issue where, you know, a lot of people are just building it in every way that they can possibly try, just trying to figure it out. But right now, this is the strongest build of it, and it's the most obvious. But Pure Despias, like, just Pure Despias, I'm going to just say, I would put it personally, I would put it right here with these decks. I'll put it here. Like, if it's just Pure Despias by itself, it's still really solid as a tier 2 deck. Going second, it's arguably just, you'd rather just play it as a going second deck. I mean, going first, you can set up really good boards, but it's just so much better as a going second deck. And if you play the Chaos Space package for Seal, you can do really nifty plays with Seal, bounce, summon Albaz from the deck, and then contact Fuse into one of your actual boss monsters, set your engine up, get some follow-ups for its graveyard effect. It can be really crazy. Like, this deck is just so nice. There's a lot that you can do. It's pretty broken, actually. Despia is actually crazy, you guys. Yeah. There's a lot of decks that I just feel like people just should give a chance. You don't really have to, like, change your... It's not to change your mind on it or anything, but, you know, it's up to you. Flunders is another tier 1.5 deck. I'll put it below Sword Souls, because I do think Sword Souls can perform better under pressure, and it's more consistent than Flunders. The thing is, like, if I wanted to play a tribute deck or a normal summon deck, I would play True Dracos. The only thing Flunder has over Draco is that it's new and it's cool. Birds are cool. Emperor Penguin, all hail the master. Like, he's actually pretty tight. I just think Flunders, like, Dracos can honestly do a better job at locking you out of the game than Flunders. And people won't admit it because they just refuse to accept the fact that Dracos could still be relevant after this long. But the fact of the matter is, Dracos really can do it better. They just don't lose to hand traps the way Flunders do. They play through them better. They can play better floodgates. As crazy as Impin is, 4 skill drains, I'll take that any day. And it's fact that 4 skill drains that Chi Xiao and Enforcer can't out, and neither can Zeus. You know what I mean? I think Impin's an incredible boss monster. I love the economics of this deck. It snowballs advantage, and it maintains its resources so well. The follow-ups are what makes the deck even scarier, but it struggles with getting the ball rolling, and that's just another, you know, that's a common story with snowballing decks like Geist, you know. Once they get going, they're pretty terrifying, but they're not strong enough to do it under the turbulence that you'll have to face playing against solid decks with good engines. The reality of it is, not only is hand traps a problem already, which makes a lot of people play cross out, but then you go second and you're staring at established boards like a bird board, you know, strikers, even just with their Widow Anchors. You're looking at Kaliga Winda or Makaba Punishment, you know. You're looking at any meta board. This deck, it's really tough going second. Like, the thing is, the only way it can break boards with engine is if certain cards resolve. And the reality of it is, the cards that are going to resolve are the cards that are the first cards that your opponent would negate. So it's really tough with Flunder. I think it's incredible when it gets going. Ryza makes this deck just a beast, honestly. Like, the fact that Ryza can loop your tribute summons and put Shifter back on top of your deck and bounce itself to constantly recur it. There's a lot more skillful interactions, I think, with Flunders than you can get with Sword Soul. I think Flunders is less of an average deck. They're both average, but I think Flunders has more room. Like, there's something else that you can do to set this deck apart with Sword Soul. Like, people pretty much, they just think they already have it solved, but Sword Soul is definitively and arguably the better deck, just because it has, like, the weaknesses that Flunder has. It has less of those. And if you're talking about unfairness, every deck pretty much on this list can do something unfair. So that's not good enough to make a deck tier 1 in my eyes. So the new decks, in my opinion, are tier 1.5. Eldritch, Geist, Pure Dragon Maids, not even my variant is like way up here. Eldritch, Geist, Dragon Maid, you know. Mystic Mine is not as good as it used to be, but it still bodies so many decks. I mean, if we're talking about Eldritch and Virtual Worlds and like Dragons, you know, they can out it. Like, Sword Souls can't out it. If it's just Mystic Mine by itself, Sword Souls can't out it. This deck can out it, you know, but it has to draw one of, because if you're not using monster effects, you're not searching it. But I still put Mystic Mine this high because the Mystic Mine deck actually is so, like, even though I hate admitting it, the Mystic Mine deck is actually really, really good. Everybody hates playing against it. Nobody's trying to get, you know, Ojama Duo tokens and get burned to death. But yeah, Flunders is here. I think the deck can be so much better, and it's not done. It's going places for sure. I think Flunders might even have a brighter future than Sword Souls. That's just me. Sword Souls obviously is the cooler looking deck, the more appealing deck, and that's why Flunders is cheaper and easier to pick up. But the thing is, like, Flunders for me, I feel like there's just something that we don't know that we can put inside of this deck that's just going to change the game for it. Because the new support is already insane that it's going to get. And playing D-Shifter alone is just really, really good for this deck, because it cuts off Droll and Ghost Ogre and Effect Veiler, which are hand traps that all hurt the deck. So Shifter solves a lot of the problems that it has, but Shifter doesn't solve, like, board state, like, game state problems, you know? Like, and that's the thing. Flunder's not good against hand traps, and it's not good against established boards. And I feel like when your deck's not even decent going second, that's a really big problem. But that's my tier list, you guys. I hope you enjoyed this. Hopefully you learned from it. And let me know your honest opinions and thoughts, you know? I honestly, like, one thing that I would change is I would say Madolches. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to put Madolches. I'm not even gonna lie. I'm gonna put Madolches under Dinosaurs. I'm gonna put Adignisters. Yeah, they're gonna stay where they are. BAs. Despias are really high. That's the thing. I like Plunders a lot, and this is one of my favorite decks, but the harsh reality is just the harsh reality. This is just not a good format for Plunders, you know? Half the meta is a good matchup and the other half's bad. And I feel like when it's that many decks that you have a bad matchup, it's just going to give it a really hard time. If it wasn't for it having such bad matchups against 3 really good meta decks, Plunders would, in my opinion, be here. They'd be right next to Prank Kids. They're just that good. But unfortunately, they're right here. I would still give them the cake over Code Talkers. Unchained is where it should be. I love the deck, and I really would want to put it higher, but and Infernoids, it's just consistency that's really holding them back. Gokis is where it should be. I think the water deck is a better combo deck. Plays through more, it navigates and excels better, and the applicability of just like all the good water support means this deck has more potential to be better than a lot of other decks on this list, you know. Some of these decks have access to support that people purposely choose to not play. Like, something I want to start experimenting is playing the Swamp Frog engine inside of my Plunders to make turn 1 Toads and trigger cards like Whitebeard, you know, after. Like, you know what I mean? Like, after I make Toad, because I don't want to, like, trigger Whitebeard, like, you know, sending him for a swap. But yeah, I'm thinking about it. And that's one of the reasons why I, like, sometimes don't want to do it, because, like, if you have to discard Whitebeard to summon Swamp Frog, you're going to be really mad at yourself for not activating it, even though Toad is a great card. but it's something to consider. And the Deep Sea Minstrel cards to stop hand traps. That's the thing too, because Plunders is a water deck. It can utilize the water support too. So I got some researching and testing to do. And my next tier list, Plunder might be higher. I'm not going to lie, because this is a deck that I'm really trying to push moving forward. As well as Agents, Magic Key, Megalith. I really want to do some crazy stuff with these decks. Pendulums, there's a lot of stuff that I'm waiting on. But I think, yeah. My bad. This is the lowest tier 2 deck on the list. You're welcome to disagree, but honestly, it's the weakest tier 2 deck in my opinion. The timer here, we're doing good. Yeah, I don't think I would change these. Synchrons is really low. Grinmanju is the worst deck on this list. These are really, really fragile, like all of these. These just lack. I gotta say though, Orchist is still really nice. I think that yeah, but Zombies actually, it's just Zombie World that puts them over. It really is. I would say ABCs, yeah. The king of Rogue right now is definitely Speedroids. Infernobles, Mathmex, Heroes, Sharks. You guys gotta try the Shark deck out. I like where I put like the tier 1s. So like the tier 1s is Drytron, Shaddoll, and this is just an engine. Brave's just an engine, but it's not the deck. So the king of the format is Drytrons, and the second for me is Shaddolls. Yeah, I can make whole videos on just how ridiculous this deck can be, because the thing is, you guys are talking to a Shaddoll player who was running pure Shaddoll for years because I couldn't afford these cards. Like, this card wasn't out for a while, but this card was out for a long time. Like, Shaddoll Invoked was the first inception of, like, Shaddolls being reintroduced into the format. And I was playing pure Shaddoll, and I was beating all the Shaddoll Invoke players with Lunalight and Fright for Patchwork cards. So, I really know what I'm talking about when it comes to this deck. I've done really well with it, and that's the thing. I think Shaddolls and Strikers have the most room for growth as tier 1 decks on this list. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tier 1 decks. Tier 1.5 is going to include 2, 4, 6, 8 decks. And tier 2 obviously includes a crap ton. So tier 1 and tier 1.5 doesn't have a lot, but the weakest tier 1.5 deck is going to be Adamanticators. I really think Dragunities is better. That's just my opinion. I wanted to put Mystic Mine where Grinmanju is, but I can't even deny it. Mystic Mine is really nice. Dragon Links is definitely the weakest tier 1 deck right now. And I like the Dragon cards, but I personally just feel like people are doing it wrong. I just think Dragon Maid's the way to go. Pure Dragon Maids is tier 1.5, and my opinion is solidified. These are the trap decks of the format, and trap Dragon Maids is insane, you guys. It's absolutely bonkers. Like, it's just crazy. Like, it's a trap deck that can actually play like a combo deck. Like, you can actually play this, and people will be like, you're just playing Dragon Link with trap cards. That's the kind of stuff it can do. You know what I mean? Like, it will do it slower at times, but sometimes you can also just pop off turn 1 and still have some high impact trap cards. But yeah, I think Strikers right now, I would definitely say Strikers are just so good. This is personally one of my favorites. Like, I've been really enjoying Strikers a lot. Like, you guys are going to see me cutting up at locals. But what I want to do, the thing with Strikers is, like, I'm still studying the meta, because when you playtest with Strikers, it has to be extensive. You've got to test a lot with this deck, because it's not even like it's hard to pilot, because the thing is, like, when you pilot Strikers, it's going to be different every matchup. So it's not like these decks where, like, you're always going to play them the same. Strikers play different every time they play a different deck. Like, that's the thing with this deck. And yeah, you adapt, but, like, your side and your main changes a lot, because you pretty much build it to beat whatever is the best deck. And more often than not, the engine can just do it by itself. So even without Engage, Strikers just, like, I truly believe if Engage was at 3, Strikers would really be the best deck. I'm sorry. Like, I know you guys might not agree. You guys might think I'm a crackhead. You guys like Full Power Thunder is better, but nah. If we were in the same format, like Full Power Thunder, Eternal format, like, Strikers really is just that nice. And Mystic Mine Strikers is worse. That's cancer. Because you take a deck that's already that good and you throw Mystic Mine in there. Whew. I try not to rely on Mystic Mine, because I like to really use just I like to dominate my opponent with just my skill, outplay, like just literally outplaying them. But yeah, that's gonna end my tier list, you guys. I really hope you enjoyed it. God bless you. Make good choices. Don't hurt your brain cells. Stay tuned for future content and have a wonderful day. Peace.